Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've never really talked about this online before, but I need to get this off my chest. It's been 23 years, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I was 11 years old when it happened, just a kid who thought monsters only existed in movies and nightmares. This happened back in 2000 in Columbia, Missouri. I grew up in one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods on the outskirts of town, where the suburbs started giving way to more rural areas. My best friend Sarah lived 3 houses down, and we were pretty much inseparable that summer. Her brother Kevin was 13 and usually wanted nothing to do with us babies, but their mom had this rule about him keeping an eye on us if we went farther than the neighborhood park. It was late July, one of those weird summer days where it wasn't blazing hot because the clouds had rolled in. Not rainy, just gray and kind of muggy. We were bored out of our minds. This was before smartphones and tablets, when kids actually had to find stuff to do outside. Sarah suggested we ride our bikes to the lake, which was about a 15-minute ride from our neighborhood. There was this trail that cut through a wooded area that everyone used. Kevin complained the whole way there about having to babysit us, but I think he was secretly glad to have something to do too. We ended up ditching our bikes at the trailhead since the path got pretty narrow and uneven in spots. I remember I was wearing these stupid jelly sandals my mom bought me, and they kept getting caught in the muddy parts. We were almost to the lake. I could see glimpses of water through the trees, maybe 30 yards ahead where the path opened up. Sarah was going on about this boy in our class she had a crush on, and Kevin was rolling his eyes and making gagging noises. Just a normal day, you know. That's what makes what happened next so messed up. One second we're just kids walking through the woods, and the next, I heard it before I saw it. There was this soft rustling sound coming from the left side of the trail. Not loud, just enough to make us pause. At first I thought it was probably a deer. We saw them all the time around there, but then this thing stepped out onto the path. I can't really explain the feeling that washed over me. It wasn't exactly fear at first, more like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was tall, way taller than any adult I knew, maybe 6 feet, probably more, and skinny, but not in a weak way, more like stretched out. It had this dirty grey hair all over its body, not fur exactly, more like stringy hair that hung down in patches, kind of like when you see those old mops that have seen better days. The weirdest part is how it moved. It walked upright on 2 legs, but not like a person. Each step was this long, deliberate stride, and its arms swung at its sides in this exaggerated way, almost ape-like. But it wasn't an ape or a gorilla. I'd seen those at the zoo. This was something else entirely. I remember thinking it looked like my neighbor's Irish wolfhound if it suddenly decided to walk on its back legs, but without the dog face. I couldn't make out its face clearly. I don't know if it was the distance or if my brain was just refusing to process it. But I know it wasn't wearing clothes or a mask. This wasn't some guy in a costume trying to scare kids. The whole thing probably lasted less than 10 seconds. It just calmly walked across the path, not hurrying, not even acknowledging we were there. Then it disappeared into the woods on the right side of the trail. It never made a sound besides the rustling of leaves as it moved. For a split second after it vanished, we just stood there frozen. Then Sarah let out this weird choked sound, not even a scream, more like when you try to talk but can't get the words out. We didn't say a word to each other. We didn't need to. All 3 of us turned at the same moment and ran. We ran so fast back down that trail that I lost one of my stupid jelly sandals and didn't even stop to get it. My lungs were burning and my feet were getting torn up on the rocky path. But the adrenaline was so intense, I barely felt it. I just kept picturing that thing changing its mind and deciding to follow us. Kevin, who normally acted so tough, was running just as scared as we were. That's what sticks with me. Even the older kid was terrified. We didn't stop running until we reached our bikes, and then we pedaled harder than I've ever pedaled in my life. When we finally got back to Sarah's house, her mom took one look at us and knew something was wrong. My foot was bleeding from where I'd cut it on the trail, and all three of us were sweaty, pale, and could barely speak. When her mom asked what happened, Kevin just blurted out, "We saw something in the woods." He couldn't even find the words to describe it. Sarah started crying, and I just stood there shaking. Her mom thought maybe we'd seen a bear or a creepy stranger or something. She called my parents, and my dad came to pick me up right away. In the car, I tried to tell my dad what we saw, but the words sounded ridiculous coming out of my mouth. It was like a tall, skinny person, but not a person, with grayish hair all over, walking on two legs. He got this look on his face. Not disbelief exactly, but that parent look when they're trying to figure out if their kid is making something up. He asked if maybe it was just a very tall man with a gray coat or jacket, but it wasn't. I know what people look like, even at 11. The worst part came the next day. Sarah's mom had called the local ranger station to report that we might have seen something unusual on the trail. 2 days later, a park ranger came to talk to us. He was nice enough, asked us to describe what we saw separately. When he was done, he told our parents it was probably just a case of kids with active imaginations getting spooked in the woods. But here's the thing, all three of us described exactly the same creature, down to the way it moved its arms. How do three kids make up the exact same details? For weeks afterward, I had nightmares. I'd wake up convinced that thing was standing in the corner of my bedroom, just watching me with a face I couldn't quite see. I refused to go back to that trail, and honestly, neither did Sarah or Kevin. Whatever bond formed between us that day from shared terror faded pretty quickly. It was like we didn't want to be around each other because we reminded each other of what we saw. My family moved to Kansas City 2 years later, and I lost touch with Sarah and Kevin. Sometimes I wonder if they still think about it too, or if they've convinced themselves it was just a weird, shared hallucination or something. But I know what I saw. I've researched it over the years. I've gone down internet rabbit holes looking at cryptid sightings and folklore. Some people talk about Bigfoot, but that doesn't fit. This wasn't a bulky, brown, ape-like creature. Others mention skinwalkers or wendigos from Native American legends, but those descriptions don't quite match either. The closest I've come is reading about something called dogmen, upright canine creatures reported in the Midwest. But even that doesn't feel right. This thing didn't have a wolf head or anything clearly animal-like that I could see. It was just wrong, like something that shouldn't exist in our world, but was just passing through. What haunts me most isn't the appearance of the creature, though that was terrifying enough. It's the casualness of the encounter. It wasn't hunting us, it didn't chase us or even seem interested in us. It was just going somewhere, using the same path humans used, completely unconcerned. Like we were the animals it barely noticed while going about its day. I'm 34 now. I've got a degree in accounting, a husband, a mortgage, and all the normal adult stuff. I've hiked plenty of trails since then and gone camping, without incident. Most days I don't think about it at all, but sometimes when I'm driving past a wooded area on an overcast day, I get this feeling in the pit of my stomach. This absolute certainty that there are things in this world we don't understand, things that exist alongside us but separate from us. I've never gone back to that specific trail, though I did look it up online a few years ago. Apparently they've developed more of that area now, wider trails, better lighting, more people. Part of me wonders if that's pushed creatures like the one we saw deeper into the remaining wild places, or if it was just a one-in-a-million encounter with something that normally stays hidden. I still can't explain what we saw that day. I've considered all the logical explanations. A very tall, homeless person, someone playing a prank, a bear standing on its hind legs. but none of them fit what we witnessed. The deliberate way it walked, the proportions of its body, the stringy grey hair, it wasn't human or any animal I've ever seen. Sometimes I think about reaching out to Sarah and Kevin to see if they remember it the same way I do. But something always stops me. Maybe I'm afraid they'll tell me they don't remember it at all, or worse, that they've convinced themselves it was something ordinary. And then I'd be alone with this memory, questioning my own sanity. All I know for sure is that for a brief moment on a cloudy summer day in 2000, 3 kids came face to face with something that shouldn't exist. And though it never threatened us or even acknowledged us, it changed how I see the world forever. There are things out there in the woods, things that walk on the edges of our world, and sometimes the barrier between their reality and ours gets thin enough for a brief, terrifying crossing. Story 2. I still get the chills thinking about it, even though it's been over 40 years. Christmas of 1980. I was 15, full of that teenage certainty that I knew everything. One weekend in December, my dad suggested we take the snowmobiles out to Nancy Green Lake in British Columbia. My Uncle Dave was visiting from Alberta, and Dad thought it would be fun to show him some of our local trails. I was pumped. We'd gotten a couple feet of fresh powder that week, and I'd been dying to get out on the new ski-doo my dad had bought that fall. Dad's buddy Mike joined us too. He was this burly guy who worked with my dad at the lumber mill and had his own sled. We set out early that morning, the temperature hovering around 15 degrees below zero. The sky was clear, that piercing winter blue you only get in the mountains. We loaded the snowmobiles onto the trailer and drove to our usual drop point about 5 miles from Nancy Green Lake. The first couple hours were perfect. We carved through pristine powder, racing across frozen meadows and weaving through stands of pine and spruce. I remember the way the sun sparkled on the snow, how the cold air burned my lungs in the best way possible. Uncle Dave rode with me since he didn't have much experience with snowmobiles. I could feel him gripping my jacket whenever we took a turn too fast, which only made me want to go faster. Around noon, we stopped in this small clearing to have some sandwiches my mom had packed. That's when things started to go sideways. Dad realized he'd left his thermos of coffee in the truck, and Mike mentioned we were running low on gas. They decided to head back to get the truck and bring it around to a service road that came closer to where we were, maybe a mile or so away. "Tyler, you and Dave stick around here," Dad said. "We'll be back in an hour, tops. Don't go too far, all right?" I nodded, my mouth full of peanut butter sandwich. Uncle Dave was happy to take a break anyway. He wasn't used to the jostling of the snowmobile and was complaining about his back. After they left, I got antsy. Sitting around wasn't my style, especially with a powerful machine just waiting to be ridden. "Hey, Uncle Dave, want to check out this side trail? It's nothing crazy, I promise." He hesitated, but eventually agreed. "All right, but we stay close, you hear me? Your dad will have my hide if anything happens to you." The trail I chose wasn't one I knew well, but it looked straightforward enough. A narrow path cutting through dense forest. The snow was deeper here, untouched. For about 20 minutes, everything was fine. Then we came to this section where a forest fire had cleared out a bunch of trees years back. There were these blackened stumps poking through the snow like rotten teeth, and burn piles scattered around, heaps of charred logs and debris that the Forestry Service had gathered but never disposed of. I was showing off a bit, trying to impress Uncle Dave with how well I could handle the snowmobile. I took a turn too sharp, and we slid sideways, plowing right into one of those burn piles. The snowmobile tilted at an angle, one ski sinking deep into the snow. "Damn it, Tyler!" Uncle Dave climbed off, wincing as his boots sank knee-deep in powder. "Your dad told us not to go far." "We're not that far," I said, though honestly, I wasn't sure anymore. The forest looked different in winter, and I'd been more focused on the thrill of the ride than paying attention to landmarks. We spent the next 20 minutes trying to free the snowmobile. The engine was still running, but the track was spinning uselessly in the deep snow. Uncle Dave and I took turns digging around it with our gloves, trying to create enough of a path to drive it back onto firmer ground. That's when I first noticed the smell. At first, I thought maybe the snowmobile was overheating, but this was different. It hit me like a physical force, this putrid, rank odor like meat left to rot in the sun for days, like roadkill, but worse, mixed with something musky and wild. Uncle Dave smelled it too. His face changed, going from frustrated to tense in an instant. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, looking around. "Probably just some dead animal under the snow," I said, though I didn't believe it. The smell was too strong, too fresh. Uncle Dave's breathing quickened. "We need to get out of here, now." "It's just a smell," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Let's get the sled free and—" "No, you don't understand." His voice dropped to a whisper. "That's a bear, Tyler. That's what they smell like." I almost laughed. "Bears hibernate in winter, Uncle Dave." "Not always," he hissed. "Sometimes they wake up, especially if they're hungry or disturbed. And they're mean as hell when that happens." I wanted to argue, but the urgency in his voice shut me up. We worked faster, both of us sweating despite the cold. The smell kept getting stronger, seeming to envelop us from all sides. It made my eyes water and my stomach turn. Finally, I managed to rock the snowmobile enough to get it back on level ground. Uncle Dave practically leaped onto the seat behind me. "Go, go, go!" he urged, his fingers digging into my shoulders. I revved the engine and we lurched forward back onto the trail. That's when I saw it. Just a glimpse as we pulled away from the burn pile. Something large moved from behind the pile of charred logs, crossing the trail maybe 30 yards ahead of us. My first thought was that Uncle Dave was right. It was a bear. But no, this moved differently. It was upright, running on two legs. For a split second, I thought it might be another snowmobiler, or maybe some crazed trapper, but that didn't make sense either. Whoever or whatever it was, they weren't dressed for winter. No bulky coat, no snowshoes, just this dark, shaggy covering. It crossed the trail with unnatural speed, moving with this wide, heavy gait that made the snow shake from the branches as it passed. Then it vanished into the trees on the other side. Uncle Dave was practically hyperventilating behind me. "Did you see that? Did you fucking see that?" His voice cracked with fear. I nodded, unable to speak. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Let's get back to the clearing," I managed to say, turning the snowmobile around. But something made me stop. Call it teenage stupidity or morbid curiosity, but I had to know what I'd seen. I shut off the engine. "What are you doing?" Uncle Dave grabbed my arm. "We need to go." "Just a second," I said, slipping off the snowmobile. "I want to check something." "Tyler, no." But he was too scared to follow me, just sat there shaking on the snowmobile. I approached the spot where the figure had crossed the trail. The smell was fainter here, but still present. The snow was disturbed, but not in the way you'd expect from someone walking. There was one clear impression, a footprint, but not from a boot or shoe. It was a bare foot. I could make out toes and a wide heel, clearly impressed in the deep powder. It was huge, easily twice the size of my own boot. And there was something else, the stride length. I followed the tracks with my eyes into the woods. Whoever or whatever made these was taking steps that would be impossible for a human. The tracks continued through 4-foot deep snow, as if the depth presented no obstacle at all. I stared at those tracks, trying to make sense of them. The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations. A hunter with weird homemade snowshoes, maybe? But I knew that wasn't it. These were feet. Bare feet in -15-degree weather, making impossible strides through deep snow. Uncle Dave was shouting for me to come back. I took one last look at the tracks, then hurried back to the snowmobile. We rode in silence back to the clearing, both of us too shaken to speak. The smell faded as we put distance between us and that burn pile, but the image of that dark figure and those tracks stayed burned in my mind. When Dad and Mike finally returned with the truck, they found us huddled by our snowmobile, jumpy at every sound from the forest. Dad immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, eyes narrowing as he looked at Uncle Dave's pale face and my wide eyes. Uncle Dave wouldn't talk, just kept shaking his head and muttering about getting back to town. So I told Dad about getting stuck, the smell, and what I'd seen. I expected him to laugh it off or tell me it was just some hiker playing a prank. Instead, he exchanged a look with Mike that made my blood run cold. "Show me," Dad said quietly. Mike stayed with Uncle Dave while Dad and I took his snowmobile back to the burn pile. The tracks were still there, unmistakable in the snow. Dad crouched down to examine them, his face unreadable. He followed the trail with his eyes, the same way I had, then stood up slowly. "Let's go," was all he said. On the ride back, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. "What was it, Dad?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, "People around here call it Sasquatch. Been stories about them in these woods for as long as there's been people living here, not something folks talk about much." "You believe in Bigfoot?" I asked, incredulous despite what I'd seen. "I believe in what I see with my own eyes," he replied. "And I've seen tracks like those before when I was about your age. My father showed them to me, just like I'm showing you. Some things in these mountains don't need a name or explanation. They just are." We never talked about it again after that day. Uncle Dave refused to go snowmobiling for the rest of his visit. When people asked why, he'd just say he pulled his back. But sometimes, when I visit my parents and Dad and I are alone, I'll catch him looking toward the mountains with this distant expression. I know he's thinking about it too. What's out there in those deep woods, moving through snow that should slow anything down, leaving tracks that shouldn't exist? I don't go snowmobiling anymore. Haven't been back to Nancy Green Lake since that day. Some memories you just can't shake, and some smells you never forget. Story 3. I've spent most of my life in the woods of northern Pennsylvania. Hunting's been part of my family tradition since before I was born. My dad taught me to shoot when I was 8, and by 12, I was going out with him regularly. Now, at 34, I've spent thousands of hours in the forest. I know what deer sound like moving through underbrush. I know what bears look like at different distances. I know every natural thing that lives in these woods. Or at least I thought I did until last October. I'm still trying to process what happened that day. I've told exactly 3 people, my wife, my brother, and my closest friend. And I could see they didn't really believe me, even though they tried to. So I'm putting this out here, hoping someone else has seen what I saw. It was October 15th, a perfect Saturday morning for rabbit hunting. My dad and I had planned this trip for weeks. The weather was ideal, around 45 degrees, overcast but not raining, with just enough moisture in the air to keep the ground quiet. We parked at our usual spot, about 2 miles down an old logging road, where we've been hunting since I was a teenager. We always follow the same routine. We unload our gear, check our shotguns, go over the plan one more time, and then separate to cover more ground. Dad usually takes the north side of the ridge, while I circle around to the south, where there's a series of small clearings that rabbits seem to love. We'd stay within shouting distance, but far enough apart not to spook the same game. "Radio check," Dad said before we split up. I clicked my handheld twice to confirm it worked. "See you at the creek crossing in 3 hours," he said, and headed off. I started making my way toward the southern slope, moving carefully like I've done hundreds of times before. The forest was quiet that morning, almost too quiet. No birds calling, no squirrels chattering, just the occasional sound of wind moving through the trees. I remember thinking it was strange, but didn't dwell on it. About 45 minutes in, I reached a familiar bend where the trail cuts between two large boulders. This spot always gives me a good vantage point over a small meadow where I've had luck before. I'd seen exactly one rabbit so far, but it darted away before I could get a shot off. As I rounded those boulders, something caught my eye about 25 feet away to my right. My first instinct was deer, but my brain immediately registered that the shape was wrong. Then I thought bear, which made more sense given the size, but that wasn't right either. What I saw, and I'm still struggling to describe this adequately, was tall. Much taller than a bear standing upright. It was walking on two legs with a slow, deliberate stride that looked completely natural. Not like a bear awkwardly standing up, but like a creature that normally walks that way. The thing was covered in dark brown hair or fur that hung maybe 3 to 4 inches long all over its body. Where the minimal sunlight filtered through the trees, the fur had this strange greenish tint to it, almost like it had moss growing on it. But it wasn't moss. It was just how the fur looked when light hit it from certain angles. Its arms were long, proportionally longer than a human's, and swung gently as it walked. I couldn't see its face clearly because it was moving away from me at an angle, but I could tell the head was somewhat conical, not round like a human's. It had broad shoulders that tapered down to a narrower waist. Here's what stands out to me most. It never acknowledged me, never turned its head, never stopped or startled, just maintained that same unhurried pace. Like I wasn't even there. And I was just standing there, frozen with my shotgun half raised, completely unable to move or call out. The whole encounter lasted maybe 5 or 6 seconds before it disappeared behind a dense cluster of hemlocks. Just gone. No sound of retreating footsteps, no branches breaking, nothing. The weirdest part was my reaction. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my mind was strangely clear. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't questioning if I had actually seen it. I knew I had. And I knew exactly what it was, even though I'd spent my entire life thinking Bigfoot stories were complete bullshit. I stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. Then I finally managed to key my radio. "Dad," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I expected. "Where are you right now?" "Just past the old oak stand," he replied. "Got 2 rabbits already. You?" I couldn't bring myself to tell him what I'd seen. Not over the radio, not when I was still standing there alone. "Nothing yet," I said. "I'm heading toward the creek early. Meet you there." I practically ran the whole way to our meeting spot, constantly looking over my shoulder. When I finally saw my dad sitting on a fallen log, cleaning his catch, the relief was overwhelming. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, noticing my face. I sat down beside him, set my shotgun down, and took a deep breath. "I think I saw something back there." "What, a 10-pointer?" he joked. "No, something. I don't even know how to describe it without sounding crazy." Dad's expression changed. He put down his knife and gave me his full attention. "Try me." So I told him everything, the height, the fur, the way it moved, how it never acknowledged me. The whole time I was talking, I kept searching his face for signs of disbelief or concern for my mental health. But all I saw was him listening intently. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that shocked me. "The Peterson brothers saw something like that back in 1987, up near Bald Eagle Mountain. Nobody believed them either." "You believe me?" I asked. "Son, I've known you your whole life. You don't make stuff up, and you know these woods better than most people twice your age. If you say you saw something, you saw something." We didn't hunt anymore that day, just packed up and hiked back to the truck in silence. I kept scanning the trees, hoping, or maybe dreading, that I'd see it again. But there was nothing. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying those 5 or 6 seconds in my mind over and over. What if I'd called out? What if I'd followed it? What if I'd taken a picture? But I was too stunned to do anything but stand there. I spent the next week researching Bigfoot sightings in Pennsylvania. There have been hundreds over the years, many in areas not far from where we were hunting. Some descriptions matched what I saw perfectly: the height, the fur, the way it moved. Others were completely different, making me wonder if there are different types, or if people are just seeing different things. The following weekend, I went back alone. I told my wife I was going hunting, but really, I just wanted to see it again. I brought a decent camera this time and spent the entire day sitting quietly near where I'd had the encounter. Nothing happened. I've been back 6 times since then. Still nothing. I've tried to convince myself that maybe I didn't see what I thought I saw. Maybe it was just a bear and my mind played tricks on me. Maybe I dozed off for a few seconds and dreamed the whole thing. But deep down, I know that's not true. I was wide awake. I was alert. I saw it as clearly as I'm seeing the screen I'm typing this on right now. What bothers me most isn't that I saw something impossible. It's that this thing was just going about its day in woods that I thought I knew completely. How many times had I walked past one without noticing? How many times had they seen me when I didn't see? Them. It's been almost 6 months now, and I still can't shake the feeling that our forests contain things we don't understand. I still hunt those woods. I was out there just last weekend, but I do it differently now. I'm more watchful, more aware, more open to the possibility that the world is stranger than we think. Sometimes I find myself hoping I'll see it again, just so I can better understand what I witnessed. Other times, I'm grateful it was only 5 seconds and that the creature showed no interest in me whatsoever. Either way, I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit. It was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist according to everything I've been taught. But it does exist. It's out there right now, walking through the trees with that same unhurried stride, not caring who believes in it and who doesn't. I was a skeptic my entire life until last October. Now I'm just a guy with a story nobody believes, and a desperate hope that someone reading this has seen what I've seen and can tell me I'm not crazy. Has anyone else encountered something like this? I need to know I'm not alone. Story 4. I've been sitting on this story for over 30 years now. Never told it to anyone outside my family. Even writing this out feels weird, like I'm breaking some unspoken rule. But I'm getting older and some stories need to be told, I guess. This happened in the fall of '89. I was 17, a junior in high school, and my brother Aaron was 15. We lived in a small town in upstate New York, the kind of place where hunting season was practically a holiday. Our dad had taught us to hunt since we were old enough to hold a rifle, and that year was Aaron's second season out with the big boys. That particular weekend in November, we'd planned a deer hunting trip with 3 of our friends, Mike, Dave, and Chris, to the woods surrounding Butler Pond in Warren County. It was remote enough that you'd rarely see other hunters, but not so far that we couldn't make it a day trip. The plan was simple: meet at my car before sunrise, drive out to our spot, split up to cover more ground, and reconvene by late afternoon. We got there when it was still dark. The air was cold enough to see your breath, maybe 35 degrees, and the forest was dead quiet except for our hushed voices as we checked our gear. I remember pulling on my bright orange hunting vest over my flannel jacket and helping Aaron adjust his. He was excited, couldn't stop fidgeting with his rifle, a .30-30 our dad had passed down to him the previous year. "Remember, stay within your zone," I told him, pointing to the crude map we'd drawn. "And for God's sake, don't shoot unless you're 100% sure it's a deer." "I know, Ryan," he said, rolling his eyes. "I'm not stupid." Mike chimed in. "Yeah, Ryan, he's not gonna shoot you in the ass like you almost did to me last year." Everyone laughed except me. I still maintain that was a trick of the light. As the sky turned that deep blue before sunrise, we split up. Dave and Chris headed northwest. Mike took the northeastern path and Aaron went due east. I decided to follow an old dirt logging road that curved around to the city water reservoir. We agreed to meet back at my Chevy Nova by 4 in the afternoon. The morning was uneventful. I walked slowly, stopping often to listen, the way Dad taught us. The forest was mostly pine and oak, with patches of dense undergrowth that had started to die back for the winter. After about an hour of walking, the trees thinned out and I could see Butler Pond stretched out before me. It wasn't that big, maybe half a mile across, with a marshy area on the far side. I decided to take a break, sitting on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing that surrounded the pond. The sun was fully up by then, cutting through the morning mist that hovered over the water. That's when I saw it. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks. Across the pond, at the edge of the tree line on the opposite shore, there was something standing there. Something big. My first thought was bear. It looked like a black bear standing on its hind legs, which isn't uncommon when they're trying to get a better look or smell. But it was massive, taller than any bear I'd ever seen, and darker too, like someone had cut a bear-shaped hole in the forest. I slowly raised my binoculars, trying not to make any sudden movements. Through the lenses, I could make out more details, but they didn't make sense. This thing was covered in dark hair or fur, with broad shoulders and long arms. Its head seemed to sit directly on those shoulders, with no visible neck, and it was just standing there, not moving. I lowered the binoculars and rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was seeing things. When I looked again, it was still there. And then it moved. That's when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It didn't drop to all fours like a bear would. It walked on 2 legs. Its stride was long and fluid, covering ground quickly as it moved along the shoreline. Even from that distance, I could tell it was huge, at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I should have been terrified, but weirdly, I felt a strange sort of calm, like my brain was working overtime to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was a hunter in a ghillie suit, but who would wear something like that during deer season? That would be suicidal. The figure disappeared into the tree line on the far side of the pond. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, just trying to process what I'd seen. Part of me wanted to radio the others. We had these cheap walkie-talkies that rarely worked beyond a quarter mile, but I hesitated. What would I even say? Hey guys, I just saw Bigfoot. They'd never let me live it down. Instead, I decided to investigate. I had my .30-06 rifle, which gave me some confidence. I started walking around the pond, sticking close to the tree line for cover. It took me about 20 minutes to reach the spot where I'd seen the figure standing. The ground there was soft, almost muddy near the water's edge. If something that size had been standing there, it should have left tracks. But there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign anything had passed through. I searched the area for almost an hour, working my way into the woods in the direction it had gone, but found absolutely nothing. By then it was around 11 in the morning, and I hadn't seen a single deer. I was rattled, questioning what I'd seen. Maybe it was just a shadow or my imagination playing tricks. I decided to head back to my original hunting spot and try to salvage the day. The rest of my hunting was half-hearted at best. I couldn't focus. Every cracking twig made me jump, and I kept scanning the trees, expecting to see that figure watching me. By 3:30, I gave up and started heading back to the car. When I got there, Aaron was already waiting, sitting on the hood of my Nova with his rifle across his lap. His face looked pale, and he wasn't wearing his usual shit-eating grin. "Any luck?" I asked, trying to sound normal. He shook his head, not looking at me. "You?" "Nah, didn't even see a doe." We stood in awkward silence for a minute before Aaron blurted out, "I saw something weird today." My stomach clenched. "Yeah? What kind of weird?" He hesitated, looking at his boots. "You're gonna think I'm crazy." "Try me." Aaron took a deep breath. "I was up on that logging road that cuts through the east side, about 2 miles from here, just sitting on a stump, waiting, and this thing came out of the woods across the road." My mouth went dry. "What kind of thing?" "It was big, really big. At first I thought it was a guy in a coat, but..." He looked up at me, his eyes wide. "Ryan, it wasn't human. It was covered in black fur, walking on 2 legs. It crossed the road maybe 50 yards from where I was sitting and went up the hill on the other side. The thing was, the east side of the forest, where Aaron had been, was exactly in the direction that the figure I'd seen had been heading." "Did it see you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Aaron shook his head. "I don't think so. I didn't move a muscle. It never even looked my way." "What do you think it was?" I already knew his answer, but I needed to hear him say it. He swallowed hard. "You're gonna laugh, but I think it was a Bigfoot. Nothing else makes sense. It wasn't a bear. I know what bears look like. This was walking upright the whole time, like a man but not a man. I should have told him then. Should have said, 'I saw it too, by the pond.' But I didn't. Something held me back. Maybe I was afraid that if we both acknowledged it, it would make it too real. Or maybe I was trying to protect him somehow. Instead, I said, 'Listen, Aaron, don't tell the others about this, okay? They'll just give you shit about it forever.' He nodded, looking relieved. "Yeah, I know. I wasn't planning to." The others showed up a few minutes later. Mike had bagged a small buck, which we helped him load into the trunk. On the drive home, everyone was talking about Mike's deer or complaining about the cold, while Aaron and I sat in silence. I caught his eye in the rearview mirror a couple of times, but neither of us said anything about what we'd seen. Life went on. We finished high school, went to different colleges, started careers and families. The Butler Pond incident became just another hunting story we never told, but it sat there in the back of my mind, never quite forgotten. 14 years later, in 2003, Aaron and I were at our parents' house for Thanksgiving. Everyone else had gone to bed, and we were sitting at the kitchen table, finishing off a bottle of whiskey. The conversation drifted to old times, hunting, trips, stupid things we'd done as kids. After a long pause, I finally asked him, "Do you remember that day at Butler Pond, fall of '89? He didn't pretend not to know what I was talking about. He just nodded, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "I still think about it sometimes." "Do you still think it was what you said it was?" I asked. Aaron looked me straight in the eye. "I know what I saw, Ryan. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a guy in a suit, and it sure as hell wasn't my imagination. It was a Bigfoot. I've never been more certain of anything in my life." That's when I finally told him about seeing the figure by the pond earlier that same day, about how it had been heading in the exact direction where he'd later spotted it crossing the road. We sat there in stunned silence, the realization sinking in that we'd both encountered the same thing, independently, hours apart. We talked about it for a while that night, comparing details, confirming what we'd seen. But after that conversation, by some unspoken agreement, we never brought it up again. Not because we doubted what we'd seen, but because some experiences exist in a weird limbo, too real to dismiss, too strange to fully accept. I'm 51 now, Aaron's 49. We still go hunting sometimes, though never back to Butler Pond. I've spent countless hours over the years looking into similar sightings in the Adirondacks, reading about cryptids and unexplained phenomena. I've never found a satisfactory explanation for what we saw that day. I don't know if I believe in Bigfoot as a species, but I do know that on that cold November morning in '89, my brother and I saw something in those woods that shouldn't have been there. Something that walked like a man, but wasn't a man. Something that left no tracks and made no sound. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods and the light starts to fade, I still find myself scanning the tree line, wondering if it's out there, watching. Indeed, Tutis, story 5. See, I've kept this story to myself for a long time, over 45 years now. Honestly, I never thought I'd share it publicly. My wife knows, and my kids have heard bits and pieces, but I've always been hesitant to talk about it fully. People jump to conclusions when you mention anything like this. They think you're crazy or looking for attention. I'm neither. I'm 74 years old now, and I figure it's time to put this down somewhere before I'm gone. This happened back in August of 1977. I was 30 at the time, working construction during the days and spending my free time fishing whenever I could. I've always been an avid fisherman, still am, though these days my joints don't cooperate like they used to. That night, I decided to do some night fishing along the Missouri River near Hauser Dam in Montana. It was a spot I'd been to dozens of times before. The fishing was always good there, especially for trout, and I knew the area well enough to navigate it after dark. I went alone, which was normal for me. My buddy Tom usually joined me, but he had come down with a summer cold and bailed at the last minute. I arrived just before sunset, around 8:30 or so. It was warm but not hot, perfect Montana summer weather. I parked my old Ford pickup at the small clearing about a quarter mile from the water and hiked in with my gear. I had my tackle box, my favorite rod, a Coleman lantern, and a small cooler with a couple beers and sandwiches. Nothing fancy. I set up at my usual spot, a little inlet where the current wasn't too strong. There was a nice flat area along the bank where I could sit comfortably. The sun was already dipping behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the water. I got my lantern going as darkness fell and positioned it on a flat rock behind me. The fishing was good that night. By around 10:30, I'd caught 4 decent-sized trout, nice rainbows, about 14 to 16 inches each. I didn't have a proper stringer with me, so I made a little stone circle at the edge of the water, partly submerged, to keep the fish fresh. It was something my grandfather taught me years ago when I was just a kid. The water keeps flowing through the stones and the fish stay cool and fresh. Everything was peaceful. The night was clear with a half moon providing some light, along with my lantern. There were the usual night sounds, crickets, the occasional splash in the water, the constant gentle rushing of the river. I remember feeling completely at ease, the way you do when you're in a place you know well. Around 11 o'clock, I cast out again, but felt the line go slack almost immediately. I reeled it in and discovered I'd lost my lure, probably snagged it on something underwater. I set my rod down and started digging through my tackle box for a replacement. That's when I realized I'd left my favorite lures in the truck. I debated whether to hike back and get them, but decided against it. I had enough basic ones in my box to make do. After fixing my line, I turned back toward the water and immediately sensed something wasn't right. It's hard to explain, but it was like that feeling when you think someone's watching you. The hair on my arms stood up, and I felt a chill despite the warm night. I glanced over at my stone circle where I'd kept the fish and noticed movement in the darkness near the riverbank, maybe 15 yards downstream from me. My first thought was that it might be a bear. We had plenty of black bears in the area, and they're known to go after fish. I picked up my lantern and raised it, trying to get a better look. What I saw in that brief moment of illumination froze me to the spot. It wasn't a bear. What I saw was massive, standing on 2 legs at the edge of the water. It was reaching down toward my stone circle, and as my light hit it, it turned slightly toward me. In that instant, our eyes met, and time seemed to stop. The The creature was enormous. I'd estimate between 7 to 8 feet tall, with a bulk that must have been at least 500 pounds. It was covered in dark, flat hair, not shaggy like a bear, but more uniform, almost like a short coat. What struck me most was how incredibly muscular it was. The shoulders were massive, easily twice as wide as mine, and I was a pretty big guy back then. Its head sat directly on those shoulders with almost no visible neck. The face was, God, I still see it when I close my eyes sometimes. It wasn't human, but it wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen either. The features were flatter than a human's, with a pronounced brow ridge and a wide nose. The eyes reflected my lantern light, not glowing like a deer's would, but definitely reflective. The moment only lasted a few seconds. As soon as my light hit it, the creature straightened up and moved with shocking speed up the embankment away from the river. That's another thing that's burned into my memory, how it moved. Despite its size, it was incredibly agile. It went up that steep bank with a fluid motion that seemed impossible for something so large. Its powerful arms swung as it moved, almost like it was using them for balance or maybe to help pull itself up the incline. I stood there, completely frozen, lantern still held out in front of me for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I finally managed to move again, I cautiously approached my stone circle. 2 of my 4 fish were gone. I don't know why, but that detail, the missing fish, somehow made the whole experience more real, more terrifying. This wasn't just some strange shadow or trick of the light. Something had been there. Something had taken my fish. What's strange is that I didn't feel like the creature had meant to threaten me. It seemed almost as surprised to see me as I was to see it. If anything, it appeared to be trying to avoid confrontation by retreating so quickly, but the sheer size and power of it was enough to make me deeply uneasy. What if it came back for the other fish? What if it decided I was a threat? I stood there, heart racing, trying to decide what to do. A part of me wanted to pack up immediately and get the hell out of there, but another part was paralyzed with a mixture of fear and fascination. Then I heard something that made the decision for me. From somewhere upstream, maybe 100 yards or so away, there was a loud sound, like a large boulder being moved and then rolled or dropped into the river. The splash was substantial enough that I could hear it clearly over the regular flow of the water. It wasn't a natural sound. Something had deliberately moved a heavy object. Strangely, that sound somewhat reassured me. If the creature was now upstream moving rocks, it was moving away from me, not coming back. But it also confirmed that what I had seen was real and still in the area. That was enough for me. I quickly gathered my remaining 2 trout, stuffed them in my cooler, and began hastily packing up my gear. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my tackle box, spilling lures and hooks across the ground. I didn't even bother picking up all of them, just grabbed what I could see in the lantern light and shoved them back in the box. The walk back to my truck was the longest quarter-mile of my life. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves had me spinning around, expecting to see that massive silhouette looming behind me. I kept my lantern on high, scanning the darkness constantly. The moon provided some light on the path, but the surrounding woods were pitch black, perfect hiding places for something that didn't want to be seen. When I finally reached my truck, I threw my gear in the back and jumped in the cab, locking the doors immediately. My hands were shaking so badly, it took me 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. As the engine roared to life, I switched on the headlights and scanned the tree line one last time. There was nothing there, at least nothing I could see. I drove home in a state of shock, my mind racing. What had I seen? The obvious answer, the one I didn't want to acknowledge, kept pushing its way to the forefront of my thoughts. The size, the appearance, the behavior, everything pointed to what people around here would call a Sasquatch or Bigfoot. I'd always scoffed at those stories before. They were campfire tales, legends, not something a grown man with a practical mind should believe in. Yet there I was, hands still trembling on the steering wheel, having seen something I couldn't explain away. When I got home, my wife was already asleep. I didn't wake her. I wasn't ready to talk about it yet. I cleaned the 2 remaining fish in the garage sink, working mechanically, my mind still at the river. I kept replaying those few seconds of illumination, trying to convince myself I'd seen something else. A bear standing oddly, a moose from a strange angle, anything but what I knew I'd seen. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I told my wife I wasn't feeling well, which wasn't entirely a lie. I felt physically ill from the lack of sleep and the adrenaline crash. I spent most of that day sitting in my garage, just thinking. By evening, I'd convinced myself to go back, in daylight, to look for evidence. Tracks, hair, anything that would either confirm what I'd seen or give me a rational explanation. I never went back. Every time I planned to go, something stopped me. Maybe it was fear, or maybe deep down I didn't want to know for sure. What if I found nothing and had to accept I'd imagined it all? Or worse, what if I found proof and had to accept that everything I thought I knew about the world was wrong? Over the years, I've read accounts from others who claim to have seen similar creatures in the Montana wilderness. Some stories match details of what I saw so closely it sends chills down my spine. Others seem like obvious fabrications. I've never reached out to any of these people or the organizations that investigate such things. I've kept my experience to myself, turning it over in my mind on sleepless nights. To this day, I can't explain what I saw on the banks of the Missouri River that August night in 1977. But I know what I saw. It was real, it was massive, and it changed how I see the world. I still fish, but never alone and never after dark. Some things once seen can't be unseen, and some places, once marked by the unexplainable, are better left undisturbed. Story 6. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened at Watson Campground. It's been nearly 2 months, but I can't stop thinking about it. I've never been the type to believe in monsters or anything supernatural, but what happened to our campsite that day in June has me questioning everything I thought I knew. My wife Emma and I had been planning this cross-country RV trip for years. With our boys finally old enough to appreciate it, Jack is 7 and Mikey just turned 5, we decided 2024 was the year to do it. We'd been on the road for about 3 weeks when we pulled into Watson, Oklahoma. It was a beautiful spot, tall pines, clean facilities, and plenty of space between campsites. We were supposed to stay there for 4 nights. June 25th started like any other day on our trip. The weather was perfect. Mid-70s, slight breeze, not a cloud in the sky. We spent the day hiking some nearby trails and swimming in the lake. The boys were exhausted by dinner time, but in that good way where they're still buzzing with excitement. I fired up the portable grill while Emma got the sides ready. Our German shepherd, Duke, was tied to a nearby tree on his long lead, content to watch us move around the campsite. I had my Bluetooth speaker playing some Eagles songs. Not too loud, just enough for background. Everything felt perfect, safe, normal. We were just sitting down to eat when we heard it. Crack. Not like a twig snapping under someone's foot. This was loud, violent, like something had just broken a small tree in half. It came from the tree line about 50 yards away at the edge of our campsite where the forest got thicker. All 5 of us froze. Yes, even Duke. The boys stopped mid-bite, their eyes wide. Emma and I exchanged glances. I remember thinking it was probably just a dead branch falling. But Duke's reaction told me differently. I've had him for 6 years, been through everything with him, and I'd never seen him act like this. His ears went straight up, his body went rigid, and his nose started working overtime. He didn't bark or growl. He just stared, laser-focused on that tree line. His hackles rose along his spine, and I swear he didn't blink for a full minute. "Daddy, what was that?" Jack whispered. "Probably just a branch falling," I said, trying to sound casual. But I kept my eyes on the trees. We sat there for what felt like forever, barely touching our food, all of us watching the forest edge. After about 15 minutes with no further sounds, we slowly started to relax. The boys eventually went back to eating and chatting, but Emma and I kept exchanging looks. Duke remained alert the entire time, only lying down after I physically guided him to do so, but he kept his eyes on those trees. As darkness fell, I built up the campfire a bit higher than usual. We roasted marshmallows, told some stories, normal camping stuff, but I couldn't shake the unease. Every few minutes my eyes would drift back to that tree line, now just a wall of darkness beyond our fire's glow. Duke refused to settle down for the night, pacing the length of his lead and occasionally stopping to stare into the darkness. That night in the RV, I lay awake for hours, listening. Every creak of the vehicle in the wind, every distant animal call had me on edge. Emma noticed but didn't say much, just squeezed my hand in the dark. I finally fell asleep sometime after 3 in the morning. The next day, we had a VA appointment I couldn't miss in Austin. It was about a 5-hour drive, so we decided to secure the campsite and make a quick overnight trip. I made sure everything was locked down tight. I sealed the dog food container, one of those heavy-duty plastic ones with the locking lid that even Duke can't figure out, secured all our stuff inside the RV, and double-checked that the solar panels on the roof were firmly attached. We'd had those installed just before the trip. They weren't cheap, but they gave us the freedom to camp off-grid when we wanted to. We left early on the 26th, spent the night in a hotel in Austin after my appointment, and headed back the next morning. I remember joking with Emma on the drive back about how Duke would be mad we left him with my brother for the night. We were in good spirits, looking forward to getting back to our campsite and continuing our vacation. We pulled into Watson Campground around 4 in the afternoon on June 27th. Everything looked normal from a distance. Our campsite was still there, the fire pit untouched, our chairs where we left them. It wasn't until I stepped out of the RV that I noticed something was wrong. The dog food container had been moved from where I'd left it secured under the RV's awning. It was now about 10 feet away, lying on its side, but that wasn't the weird part. The lid, which requires you to press 2 tabs simultaneously while lifting to open, had been removed and placed neatly beside it. Not broken, not forced, properly opened. The food was scattered in a 3-foot radius around the container. Kids playing pranks, Emma suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. I nodded, but something felt off. Why would kids bother opening dog food? And how would they know exactly how to work the mechanism? I decided to check the rest of our stuff. The fishing gear I'd left on the picnic table was untouched. Rods, tackle box, everything still there. Nothing seemed stolen. Then I opened the RV door. The storage boxes we had mounted to the interior walls, heavy-duty plastic containers attached with industrial-strength adhesive strips, had been torn down. Not just one, all 4 of them. The adhesive hadn't failed. The actual plastic of the boxes where the adhesive attached had been ripped away. The contents, mostly kids' toys and books, were scattered across the floor. "What the hell?" I muttered. Emma came in behind me and gasped. "Nathan, did someone break in?" I checked the door and windows. No signs of forced entry. Everything was locked exactly as we'd left it. "I don't know how they would have gotten in," I said. That's when I remembered the solar panels. I went outside and climbed the ladder to the RV roof. What I saw made my blood run cold. One of the panels, the one closest to the back of the RV, was hanging by a single bracket. The other 3 brackets had been wrenched free, the metal actually twisted and bent. These weren't screwed in, they were welded to the frame. Something had torn welds that had survived thousands of miles of highway driving, storms, and high winds. I took some photos with my phone, my hands shaking. Whatever did this had incredible strength. This wasn't vandalism by teenagers or a break-in by someone looking to steal valuables. This was something else entirely. I climbed down and told Emma what I'd found. We decided to report it to the campground office. The manager, an older guy named Bill, came out to look. Been running this campground for 17 years, he said, scratching his head as he looked at the solar panel. Never seen anything like this. Could it have been an animal? Emma asked. A bear, maybe. Bill shook his head. No bears in this part of Oklahoma, Ma'am. And I've seen bear damage. They're messy, destructive. This is precise, like whatever did it knew exactly what it was doing. He pointed to the dog food container. That's what's bothering me. Whatever opened that had to press those tabs just right. Bears, raccoons, they just tear into it. A storm had rolled through the area the day we were gone, washing away any footprints or evidence that might have been left behind. Bill offered to move us to another campsite, but for some reason that felt even worse, like whatever had visited us might follow. We decided to leave Watson altogether. As we were packing up, I kept looking back at that tree line, feeling like we were being watched. The boys picked up on our anxiety and were unusually quiet as we loaded the RV. Just as we were about to leave, Jack tugged on my sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, "I saw it." My heart skipped. "Saw what, buddy?" "Last night, in my dream. The thing that broke your solar thing." I knelt down to his level. "What did it look like?" He frowned, concentrating. "It was big, really big, and it had long arms. It looked at me through the window while I was sleeping." I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. "It was just a dream, Jack," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. As we drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror. The tree line remained still, revealing nothing. We cut our trip short and headed home to Missouri. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. What had the strength to break welded metal brackets, but the dexterity to open a complex latch? Why take nothing of value? And what had my son seen in his dream? I've spent hours researching, looking for similar incidents in the area. I found a few vague reports from other campers about strange noises and unexplained damage, but nothing as specific as what we experienced. I still don't have answers, but one thing's for sure, we won't be camping near Watson, Oklahoma again. And whenever Duke stares intently into the woods, behind our house, I can't help but wonder if whatever visited our campsite that day has somehow followed us home. Story 7. So this happened about 2 years ago, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I've been debating whether to post this for a long time, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone else has seen something similar. Me and my 2 buddies, Jake and Chris, decided to do some camping out near this really remote lake. I'm not going to give the exact location because, well, we weren't exactly supposed to be camping there. Don't judge me. It's this beautiful spot near the Nevada-California border, kind of in the middle of nowhere. We're all pretty experienced hikers, and we've done plenty of backcountry camping before, but this trip turned out different than any other we've been on. We'd planned to hike Boundary Peak, which is the highest point in Nevada. The weather was perfect that day. Clear skies, not too hot, just a beautiful late spring day. We parked my old Subaru about 2 miles from our intended campsite because the access road was partially flooded from the spring melt. No big deal, we figured we'd just hike in with our gear. We set up camp first, leaving most of our stuff there, and then headed off to do the main hike up Boundary Peak. The hike itself was awesome, challenging enough to feel accomplished, but not so hard that we were completely wiped out. We took a bunch of photos at the summit, had some trail mix and jerky, and headed back down, feeling pretty great about ourselves. By the time we got back to the road crossing, it was late afternoon, maybe around 4 or 5. The road was still flooded like it had been earlier, about 2 feet of water covering about 15 feet of the dirt road. The water was completely still, like glass with this superfine, silty bottom. You could see every little pebble under the surface. We did what we'd done on the way in, sat down on the edge, took off our hiking boots and socks, rolled up our pants and waded across barefoot. The water was ice cold from the snowmelt, and I remember cursing as I stepped in. The silty bottom was super soft, and our feet sank in about an inch with each step, leaving these perfect footprints in the underwater silt. You could clearly see all 5 toes, the arch, the heel, everything. The water was so clear you could look back and see the trail of our footprints under the surface. We got to the other side, dried our feet with a bandana, put our boots back on, and headed to our campsite to start dinner. We had those freeze-dried camping meals that you just add hot water to. Nothing fancy, but after hiking all day, they taste amazing. About an hour later, Chris realized he'd left his phone in the car. He wanted to check if we had any cell service. We didn't, and grab his portable charger. I offered to walk back with him since it was getting darker and none of us wanted to be alone out there. Jake stayed behind to keep an eye on the campsite and get the fire going stronger. So Chris and I headed back to the car, which meant crossing that flooded section again. We did the same routine, boots off, wade across barefoot. But this time, as soon as we stepped into the water, something felt off. The water was still crystal clear, and we could see our footprints from earlier, but there was something else there too. There was a new set of footprints that absolutely hadn't been there before. At first, I thought maybe it was Jake messing with us, but these prints were coming from the opposite direction. They emerged from the water on one side, crossed the flooded section, and then disappeared into the bushes on the other side. They definitely weren't there when we crossed earlier, and they definitely weren't ours. I nudged Chris and pointed at them. "You see that?" He nodded, and I could tell he was just as confused as I was. The weirdest thing about these footprints was how they looked. Unlike our clearly defined prints, these were blurry. That's the only way I can describe it. Like each footprint had this fuzzy halo around it in the silt, as if the ground had been stirred up around each step. The toes weren't clearly defined either, more like rounded impressions where toes should be. And the spacing between them was off too, like whatever made them had an unusual walking pattern. They were also smaller than our prints. Not tiny, but definitely not from a full-grown adult, maybe the size of a young teenager's foot. But what would a kid be doing out here, miles from nowhere? We both just stood there staring at these prints for what felt like forever. I remember feeling the hair on my arms stand up despite the warm evening. I'm not usually the type to get spooked, but something about those prints felt deeply wrong. They seemed fresh too, like they'd been made recently. "Should we follow them?" Chris asked, pointing to where they disappeared into the dense brush. "Hell no," I replied. I'm not ashamed to admit I was pretty freaked out. There was no way I was going to follow some strange tracks into the wilderness as it was getting dark. We quickly got to the other side, put our boots back on in record time, and practically jogged to the car. We grabbed what we needed and headed back, making sure to stay together. When we crossed the flooded section again, the strange footprints were still there, undisturbed. We got back to camp and immediately told Jake what we'd seen. He thought we were pulling his leg at first, but he could tell by our faces that we were serious. We debated packing up and leaving, but it was already getting dark and none of us wanted to hike out at night, especially knowing something strange was out there. We built the fire up bigger than we normally would and stayed close to it. I kept getting this feeling we were being watched from the tree line, but every time I shined my flashlight out, there I didn't see anything, just shadows and trees. Around 9 or 10 that night, we heard a vehicle approaching. My first thought was, great, now we're going to get busted for illegal camping on top of everything else. A white SUV with green stripes pulled up, US Border Patrol. We weren't that far from the California-Nevada border, so I guess it made sense they'd be patrolling. This agent steps out, tall guy, maybe in his 40s, buzz cut. He was surprisingly chill. Didn't even mention that we probably shouldn't be camping there. Just asked if we'd seen any unusual activity, said they were doing routine checks. We offered him some coffee, which he accepted, and he sat down with us for a few minutes. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe I just needed some rational explanation. But I mentioned the strange footprints we'd seen in the flooded section of road. I expected him to dismiss it or laugh it off. Instead, he got this look on his face, not scared, but definitely serious. Then he chuckled in this uncomfortable way and said, "Oh yeah, we call them Littlefoot, because the prints aren't big enough to be Bigfoot." The casual way he said it made my skin crawl, like this wasn't something unusual to him, like this was a known thing. He went on to explain that his unit had been spotting these strange prints in the same region near the lake and border for some time, never large enough to match classic Bigfoot descriptions, but always fuzzy and indistinct, typically appearing out of nowhere. "You actually believe in that stuff?" Jake asked him. The agent shrugged. "Doesn't matter what I believe. I just report what I see. And I've seen those prints dozens of times in this area. Always the same, smaller than an adult's, blurry around the edges like they're disturbing the ground somehow. Sometimes they just appear or disappear in the middle of nowhere, like whatever makes them can just..." He trailed off. "What do you think it is?" I asked. "Official line is, it's probably some animal with deformed feet, maybe a bear with injured paws. Unofficially..." He looked around like he was making sure no one else was listening, which was ridiculous because we were literally in the middle of nowhere. "Let's just say there's a reason people don't camp out here much." He wouldn't elaborate further, just finished his coffee, thanked us, and told us to be careful and make sure our fire was completely out before we went to sleep. Then he drove off, leaving us sitting there in stunned silence. None of us slept well that night. We kept the fire going much longer than we should have. Every little noise in the darkness had us on edge. I kept thinking about those footprints and the agent's matter-of-fact way of talking about Littlefoot, like it was just another thing they dealt with out here. The next morning, we packed up early and headed out. When we got to the flooded section, I half expected the footprints to be gone, like maybe we'd imagined the whole thing. But they were still there, though less distinct now as the water had settled overnight. But there was something new too. Another set of the same strange footprints, this time heading in the opposite direction. And these were definitely fresh, like they'd been made just hours before. We crossed quickly and didn't stop until we reached the car. We didn't talk much on the drive home. What was there to say? We'd all seen it, we'd all heard what the Border Patrol agent said, and none of us had an explanation. I've tried researching Littlefoot online since then, but there's not much out there beyond the usual Bigfoot stuff. I've thought about going back with a camera to document it, but honestly, I'm not sure I want to. Something about those blurry footprints and the way they appeared out of nowhere still unsettles me deeply. Sometimes I wonder if that Border Patrol agent tells all the campers he finds out there the same story, just to mess with them. But then I remember those footprints, how they disturbed the silt in that strange, hazy way that none of our footprints did. And I know whatever left those tracks wasn't human. I still go camping and hiking, but not in that area. And whenever I cross water now, I always look down, half expecting to see those strange, fuzzy footprints emerging from nowhere and leading to nowhere. Story 8. I've been sitting on this experience for nearly 3 years now, but it still keeps me up at night sometimes. I need to finally get this out there, so bear with me. It happened in late October of 2020. 10 of us had rented this cabin in the woods outside Townsend, Tennessee, right near Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The whole COVID thing was in full swing, and we were all desperate to get away from our apartments and just breathe for a weekend. We found this place online, looked perfect, totally isolated, surrounded by trees with this big clearing in front. No neighbors for at least half a mile. The cabin was gorgeous. 3 bedrooms, this massive living room with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a wraparound deck on the second floor that gave you a view of basically everything. We arrived Thursday evening, and things were normal at first. We grilled out, had some drinks, played board games, typical friend stuff. By Friday afternoon, things started getting weird. I was the first one to notice this smell outside. At first, I thought maybe an animal had died somewhere nearby. It happened sometimes in wooded areas, right? But this was different. It was this heavy, putrid smell that seemed to hang in the air around the cabin. Not inside, just outside, which made it even stranger. I mentioned it to my boyfriend Jack, and he noticed it too. Probably just a dead raccoon or something, he said, but I could tell he was a little weirded out too. By evening, we were all talking about it. The smell would come and go with the wind, but it wasn't getting any better. We tried to ignore it and just enjoy our night. We made a big dinner, drank some wine, and most people turned in early because we were planning to hike the next day. Jack and I stayed up talking on the upper deck. It was around 1 in the morning, and everyone else was asleep except us and maybe Lily. I think she was reading in her room. The night was clear, and you could see so many stars. It was beautiful, but also intimidating how dark it was beyond our little cabin lights. That's when we heard the first crack. It sounded like a branch breaking, but not like when you step on a twig. This was loud, like something massive had snapped a whole branch off a tree. Jack and I both froze mid-conversation and looked at each other. "What was that?" I whispered. "Probably just a deer," he said, but he stood up and walked to the railing. Then we heard another crack, this one louder and closer, and another. It wasn't random, it was methodical, like something moving through the woods and breaking branches as it went. Not accidentally, but deliberately. The noises kept getting closer, and now it sounded like things were being thrown. Like whole branches were being picked up and hurled through the trees. I've been camping my whole life, and I've never heard anything like it. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't throw things. We were both standing at the railing now, straining to see into the darkness. The cabin had these exterior lights that illuminated maybe 20 feet into the woods, but beyond that was just blackness. Then came this enormous bang from just beyond the tree line nearest to us. It sounded like someone had taken a baseball bat to a tree trunk. Jack grabbed my arm. "Amelia, let's go inside," he said quietly. We hurried inside and locked the door behind us. My heart was racing. I suggested we wake someone else up because I was starting to freak out. We knocked on Lily's door first, since we knew she was probably still awake. She opened, it immediately book in hand. "You guys hear that too?" she asked. We nodded and explained what we'd been hearing. Lily immediately went to wake up Daniel and Marcus, who had the bedroom next to hers. Within minutes, 5 of us were standing in the kitchen, whispering about what to do. "Turn off all the lights," Lily suggested. "We can see better outside that way." So we did. We turned off every light in the cabin and gathered by the large windows in the living room that overlooked the clearing. The moon was bright enough that we could see the field in front of the cabin and the edge of the forest. We stood there for what felt like forever, just watching and listening. The sounds had stopped when we went inside, but after about 5 minutes they started again. More branches breaking, more heavy movement in the underbrush, and then Marcus grabbed my arm so hard it left a bruise. "Look," he whispered, pointing toward the far edge of the clearing. That's when I saw it. I'll never forget this as long as I live. There was something walking across the open field toward our cabin. It was massive, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, and it was walking upright on 2 legs. But it wasn't human. Its proportions were all wrong. Its arms hung down past its knees, and its head sat directly on its shoulders with almost no neck. And it was black, not like African-American black, but like absence of light black. The moonlight didn't reflect off it at all. It just absorbed the light. "Holy shit," Daniel whispered. "What the fuck is that?" We all started talking at once, pointing and freaking out. The thing stopped dead in its tracks when we started making noise. It just stood there, perfectly still, for maybe 10 seconds. Then it turned and walked back into the forest, not running, just walking deliberately, like it wasn't afraid of us at all. Our commotion woke everyone else up. Suddenly, all 10 of us were crowded around the windows, and I was trying to explain what we'd just seen. Half of them thought we were playing a prank. "I'm going outside," said Ryan, always the skeptic. "This is bullshit." "Don't you dare open that door," I said, but he was already heading for it. We all followed him onto the deck, and that's when we heard it. This long, drawn-out howl that echoed through the trees. It wasn't a wolf or a coyote. It was deeper, more guttural, and it lasted way too long, like whatever was making it had much bigger lungs than any animal should have. We all froze. Even Ryan looked scared now. "Told you," I whispered. The howl stopped, and then the cracking sound started again, branches snapping, underbrush being crushed under heavy footsteps. We could track the movement by sound, circling around the left side of the cabin toward the back. Then Sarah pointed. "There, between those two pines." In the gap between two tall trees, illuminated by moonlight, we saw something large move. It was just for a second, but it was unmistakable. The same dark silhouette we'd seen in the field, moving with disturbing fluidity for something so big. Nobody slept that night. We stayed together in the living room, lights on, taking turns watching out the windows. The sounds continued on and off until dawn, always keeping just beyond the reach of visibility. When the sun finally came up, Ryan, Jack, Marcus and I went outside to look around. The smell was still there, maybe even stronger. We followed the tree line where we'd seen the thing disappear the night before. That's when we found the footprint. It was in a patch of soft earth near the edge of the woods. At first, I thought someone was playing a prank. It had to be fake. The print was enormous, easily 18 inches long and incredibly deep in the soil, like whatever made it weighed hundreds of pounds. It wasn't a bear print. Bears don't have feet shaped like that. It had 5 toes, but they were all wrong, too long, with what looked like claws at the end. The impression was so deep that whoever made it would have had to be impossibly heavy to sink that far into packed dirt. Jack took pictures, but they don't do it justice. You had to see how deep it was, how the earth was compressed around it. No human could have made that print. Nothing I know of could have made that print. We looked for more, but only found the one. It's like whatever it was knew to stay where the ground was harder. We left that day. Nobody wanted to stay another night. We made up some excuse about a family emergency and forfeited our deposit. The whole drive home, nobody really talked. What was there to say? I've spent countless hours researching since then. Looked into every cryptid, every legend from that region. Nothing quite matches what we saw. The closest might be the descriptions of Sasquatch, but this wasn't that. Sasquatch doesn't move like that. Doesn't sound like that. Sometimes I convince myself it was just a bear walking funny or some elaborate prank by locals. But then I remember that footprint so deep in the earth. I remember how it moved, fluid and deliberate, like it was intelligent. I remember how it stopped when it realized we saw it, how it just turned and walked away like it was deciding to come back later. And I remember that smell, that putrid, rotting smell that hung around the cabin. I don't go camping anymore, neither do most of the others who were there. Jack and I broke up a few months later, not because of this specifically, but this experience changed us both. How could it not? I still text with Lily sometimes. She's the only one who will talk about that night. The others pretend it didn't happen or make jokes about it. But Lily and I, we know what we saw. We know something found us in those woods. And the worst part? I can't shake this feeling that it wasn't just passing through. It was looking for something, or someone. And I think it's still out there, waiting. Story 9. I've never shared this publicly before. For 20 years, I've only told this to 2 people outside my family, and both times I regretted it immediately. One person laughed it off as a childhood fantasy. The other got weirdly obsessed and kept asking for proof I couldn't provide. But I need to get this out now, even anonymously. I was 7 when we moved to Wyoming, about 30 minutes from Yellowstone's east entrance. My dad had inherited 18 acres of old farmland with a modest house from his uncle. The property had been vacant for almost a decade, but my parents saw it as our chance to escape city life in Denver. Dad worked remotely as an IT consultant, and Mom homeschooled me, so the isolation wasn't an issue. At least that's what they thought. The first strange incident happened about 2 months after we moved in. I remember it was early October. because I had just finished making a Halloween decoration for our fridge. I woke up around midnight needing to use the bathroom. As I was heading back to bed, I glanced out my window, which faced the back of our property, where an old storage shed stood about 50 yards from the house. That's when I saw it. There was this figure. Even from that distance, I could tell it was massive. It was crouched down by the shed door, but even hunched over, it had to be at least 7 feet tall. The moonlight wasn't great, but I could make out broad shoulders and what looked like dark, matted hair covering its body. What struck me most was how it was methodically opening and closing the shed door, like it was studying how the hinges worked. Open, close, open, close. Not frantically, but with purpose. I ran to my parents' room and woke up my dad. By the time he grabbed his flashlight and we returned to my window, whatever had been there was gone. Dad went outside with his shotgun to check, but found nothing except the shed door hanging open. He told me it was probably just a black bear, even though we both knew bears don't open and close doors. Repeatedly, Mom suggested I'd had a nightmare, and eventually I started to wonder if maybe they were right. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. Things were quiet for a few months after that. Then the sounds started. It began with distant howls that didn't sound quite like coyotes or wolves. They had this quality to them that's hard to describe. Lower, more deliberate. Sometimes they'd start as a normal howl, but end with what sounded almost like words, not English, just structured vocalizations. Our dog Rusty, a 70-pound German Shepherd mix who feared absolutely nothing, started refusing to go outside after dark. He'd plant his feet at the door and whine pathetically until someone physically carried him out. Even then, he'd do his business as quickly as possible, right by the porch, then scratch frantically at the door to be let back in. One night when I was 8, I overheard my parents arguing in hushed tones. Mom wanted to install security cameras, while Dad insisted it would be a waste of money. "They're just passing through," he kept saying. "If we ignore them, they'll move on." "Them? Who's them?" I asked, standing in the hallway. They both jumped. Mum recovered first, saying, "Just some hikers who might be camping on the far edge of our property. Nothing to worry about, sweetie." But I noticed Dad started keeping his shotgun by the back door after that. When I was 9, I woke up to the sound of labored breathing outside my window. Heavy, raspy breaths, like someone with damaged lungs trying to run a marathon. My window was cracked open to let in the summer breeze, and the breathing was so close it sounded like whatever it was had its face right up against the screen. I lay frozen in my bed, too terrified to move, certain that if I made a sound, it would know I was awake. The breathing continued for what felt like an eternity, but was probably 5 minutes. Then there was a soft tapping on the screen, like something was testing it with a fingernail or claw. That's when I screamed. I heard a startled grunt, then heavy footsteps racing away from the house. Dad burst into my room seconds later, flipping on the light and rushing to the window. He shoved it all the way open and leaned out, swinging his flashlight in wide arcs. "God damn it!" he shouted, slamming his fist against the windowsill so hard the glass rattled. "Get off my property!" He turned to me, his face pale. "Did you see it?" I shook my head. "Just heard it breathing." Dad installed bars on my window the next day. He told Mom it was because of bears, but we all knew better. The incidents continued, becoming more frequent and bolder. We'd find strange arrangements of sticks in the yard. Not random piles, but deliberate formations. Our trash cans would be meticulously picked through, with certain items taken and others left behind. Once, Dad found all our garden tools removed from the shed and arranged in a perfect circle, points facing inward. When I was 11, we added a screened porch to the back of the house. Mom loved sitting out there in the evenings, saying it made her feel like we could enjoy nature without being quite so exposed. Dad installed bright motion sensor lights all around the perimeter of the house that same month. The worst incident, the one that finally convinced Dad to sell, happened the summer I turned 12. We were having a barbecue on the screened porch. It was around 7 in the evening, still fully light outside in July. Mom had made her famous potato salad, and Dad was grilling burgers. Rusty was inside the house because thunderstorms made him anxious, and there had been distant rumbling all afternoon. I was setting the table when we heard crashing sounds from the tree line about 100 yards away. Dad stepped to the edge of the porch, squinting toward the noise. "Probably deer," he said, though his hand moved to his hip where he kept his pistol when we were outside. He was right about it being a deer, but so horribly wrong about everything else. A large doe burst from the trees, running full tilt toward our house. Even from that distance, I could see the wild terror in its eyes. It was running for its life. Something was chasing it. At first, all I could make out was a dark shape, moving with incredible speed. It was running on all fours, but there was something fundamentally wrong about its movement. Too fluid, too purposeful for a normal predator. The deer reached our yard and made a desperate leap toward the porch, crashing through the screen and landing on the concrete floor, legs splaying out as it tried to scramble up. Blood poured from wounds on its flanks. Before any of us could react, the thing chasing it hit the porch screen with such force that the entire frame buckled. The creature stood upright, and stepped through the gaping hole. I will never, as long as I live, forget what I saw in that moment. It was at least 7 feet tall. Its body was covered in sleek black fur, but not like a bear's, more like a short-haired dog's, but thicker. Its torso was broad and muscular, tapering to a narrower waist. The legs bent wrong, like a dog's hind legs, but longer, stronger. Its arms hung almost to its knees, ending in hands, not paws, hands, with long fingers tipped with curved claws. But it was the face that haunts my nightmares to this day. A long snout filled with teeth that looked too big for its mouth, pointed ears that stood straight up from its head, and eyes, yellow-green eyes with vertical pupils that fixed directly on mine for one terrible second. It made no sound as it grabbed the injured deer by the neck, hefting the 100-plus-pound animal like it weighed nothing. My father had his gun out, but he didn't fire. Couldn't fire, I think, from pure shock. The creature backed out through the torn screen, still holding the struggling deer. When it reached the edge of our yard, it turned back toward us, and then, God help me, it smiled. Its lips pulled, back in what was unmistakably a grin, exposing those terrible teeth, before it turned and loped away on 2 legs, carrying its prey into the forest. The whole encounter lasted maybe 15 seconds. Mom started crying. Dad sat down hard in one of the porch chairs, his gun hanging limply from his fingers. I just stood there, unable to process what I'd seen. We stayed in a motel that night. 2 days later, Dad contacted a realtor. Within a month, we'd moved to Idaho Falls, leaving most of our furniture behind because Mom refused to bring anything that thing might have touched. We rarely talk about what happened. When we do, it's in vague terms. That day, or what we saw. Dad eventually admitted he'd seen similar creatures multiple times over the years, but had convinced himself they were bears to preserve his sanity. I've spent years researching what we might have encountered. The figure by the shed that first night had the characteristics of what people call Bigfoot, tall, broad, covered in hair. But that thing on the porch, that was something else entirely. The closest description I've found is what some call a dogman. I don't know if they were the same species or different creatures altogether. I don't know why they targeted our property or what they wanted. All I know is that they were intelligent. They were watching us, and they wanted us to know they were there. The property sold quickly, surprisingly. Sometimes I wonder about the family that bought it. I've thought about trying to find them, to warn them, but what would I say? Watch out for the monsters? Would they even believe me? Would you? All I know is that 20 years later, I still wake up sometimes to the phantom sound of labored breathing outside my window. And I still can't sleep with the window open, not even a crack. Story 10. I've never told this story publicly before. For years, I've kept it to myself. Partly because I didn't think anyone would believe me. And partly because even now, over 50 years later, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It was October of 1968. My husband Jack worked nights at the railroad, and I was living in our little house in Wheeler Canyon, just off Ogden Canyon in Utah, with our 2-year-old son, Tommy. It was a peaceful place most of the time. Quiet, surrounded by trees with a small pasture where we kept 2 horses. The property sat back from the main road, giving us privacy, but also isolation. The house itself was nothing special, a simple ranch style with 3 bedrooms, a living room with big windows facing the front yard, and a kitchen in the back. That night started like any other. Jack had left for work around 4 in the afternoon, and I'd put Tommy to bed around 7:30 after his bath. He was a good sleeper, thank goodness. Once he was down, I settled into my usual evening routine, a TV dinner and whatever was on the television that night. I remember it was some variety show, but I couldn't tell you which one anymore. It must have been around 9 when I decided to get a glass of water from the kitchen. It was a chilly night, and I remember thinking I should check the thermostat on my way back. The kitchen was at the back of the house, and you had to walk through the dining area to get there. I filled my glass at the sink, looking out the small kitchen window into the darkness of our backyard. I couldn't see much, just the outline of the clothesline and the shadows of the trees beyond. I still remember every detail of what happened next. I walked back into the living room, glass in hand, and froze, completely froze. There, staring at me through the picture window, were 2 glowing red eyes. I'm not exaggerating when I say glowing. They weren't just reflecting light, they emitted a dull red glow of their own, and they were high up, much higher than any person's eyes should be when looking through our windows. The outdoor light was on, the one Jack had installed by the front door, and it cast just enough illumination for me to make out a large, dark figure standing there. At first, I tried to convince myself I was seeing things. Maybe it was a reflection, or my mind playing tricks after watching too many late-night movies. I blinked hard, even rubbed my eyes, but when I looked again, it was still there. Those eyes, fixed on me, unmoving. The longer I stared, the more I could make out, a massive, broad-shouldered silhouette that seemed to be covered in something. Not clothes exactly. It was hard to tell in the dim light, but it looked almost furry. I had never heard of Bigfoot back then. This was before all those documentaries and TV specials. I had no context for what I was seeing, which made it all the more terrifying. All I knew was that something huge was outside my window, watching me, and it wasn't human. My first instinct was to check on Tommy. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the window until I reached the hallway. Then I rushed to his room, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. He was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the nightmare unfolding. I closed his door quietly and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath and think clearly. The phone was in the living room. I would have to go back out there, back into view of whatever was watching our house. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold on to the glass of water I was still clutching. I set it down on the hallway table and tried to steady myself. "It's just a person," I whispered to myself. "Just a very tall person playing a cruel joke." But deep down, I knew better. No person had eyes like that. I gathered every ounce of courage I had and crept back to the living room, staying close to the wall, as far from the windows as possible. When I reached the phone, I snatched it up and dialed the sheriff's department with trembling fingers. The deputy who answered sounded bored until I managed to stammer out that there was a prowler at my window, that I was alone with my baby, and that my husband wouldn't be home until morning. "Stay inside and lock your doors, ma'am," he told me. "We'll send someone out, but it might take a while. We've got a situation in town we're dealing with." After hanging up, I turned off every light in the house. I figured if I couldn't see out, maybe whatever was out there couldn't see in. I grabbed a kitchen knife, fat lot of good that would do against something so massive, and sat on the floor in the hallway where I could keep an eye on both Tommy's door and the living room. The next 45 minutes were the longest of my life. Every sound made me flinch. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the occasional creak of the house settling. But there were other sounds too, sounds that didn't belong. A soft rattling at the windows, like something gently testing them. Then the same at the back door, not pounding or trying to break in, just checking, methodically working its way around the house. At one point, I heard a strange, low sound, not quite a growl, not quite a grunt, from the side of the house where Tommy's room was. I nearly threw up from fear, thinking about that thing being so close to my baby. I clutched the knife tighter and considered grabbing Tommy and making a run for Mrs. Peterson's house down the road. But the thought of going outside, where that thing was waiting, was even more terrifying than staying put. When headlights finally swept across the living room wall, I nearly cried with relief. I heard car doors slam, footsteps on the gravel, and then a firm knock at the door. "Sheriff's Department, ma'am." I got up on wobbly legs and went to the door, still clutching my knife. "Who is it?" I called, even though I'd heard them identify themselves. "Deputy Harkins and Deputy Reynolds, ma'am. You called about a prowler?" I turned on the porch light and peered. Through the peephole, 2 uniformed officers stood there, looking impatient and cold. I unlocked the door with shaking hands and let them in. "Sorry for the delay, ma'am," the taller one said. "Had a bar fight in town to break up." I explained what I'd seen. The eyes, the massive figure, the sounds around the house. I could tell they didn't fully believe me. The shorter Deputy Reynolds exchanged a look with his partner that clearly said, "bored housewife with an overactive imagination." "We'll take a look around," Harkins said, more to humor me than anything else. They went outside with their flashlights, and I hovered anxiously by the door. After about 10 minutes, they came back. "Well, there's definitely been something moving around your property," Reynolds admitted. "Found some odd prints in the soil by the side of the house, but could be anything. Deer, maybe a bear, though we don't get many bears this close to town." "What about the eyes I saw, the figure at the window?" I pressed. Deputy Harkins frowned and walked over to the living room window where I'd seen the eyes. He was a tall man, 6'3" at least, and he had to stand on the top step of the porch to reach eye level with the window. "Whatever you saw, ma'am," he said slowly, "would have to be mighty tall to look in at this level. I can barely manage it myself, standing on the step here." That confirmation sent a fresh wave of fear through me. It wasn't my imagination. Something unnaturally tall had been looking in at me. The deputies stayed a bit longer, walking the perimeter of the house again and checking that all my doors and windows were secure. Before leaving, Deputy Harkins hesitated. "Ma'am, is there somewhere you could stay tonight? A neighbor, perhaps, or someone who could come stay with you?" His concern only frightened me more. "My husband won't be home until 7 in the morning," I said, "and we don't know many people here yet." He nodded, looking troubled. "We'll do an extra. Patrol past your house tonight. Keep your doors locked and call immediately if you see or hear anything unusual." After they left, I didn't go back to bed. I sat in Tommy's room, knife in hand, jumping at every sound until dawn broke. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke to Tommy babbling in his crib and sunlight streaming through the window. In the harsh light of day, I might have convinced myself it was all a bad dream, except for the footprints the deputies had mentioned. I worked up the courage to go look at them after breakfast. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Enormous, much bigger than a man's foot, with strange indentations that didn't match any boot or shoe pattern. And they were deep, like whatever made them had been extremely heavy. When Jack got home, I told him everything. He believed me. He'd heard our horses making a commotion a few nights before when he was home, but hadn't seen anything when he went to check. Now it made sense. I couldn't stay in that house another night. We packed up the essentials and went to a motel in Ogden proper that very day. Within a week, I'd convinced Jack to find us a new place to live. He kept the Wheeler Canyon house for a while, going back to check on it periodically. About 3 months after we moved out, he had his own encounter. A large, hairy face peering through the diamond-shaped window by the door. He came home white as a sheet and put the house on the market the next day. I never found out what it was that visited us that night. Years later, when Bigfoot became a household name, and I saw sketches of what people claimed to have seen, chills ran down my spine. The height, the build, those eyes, it all matched. Sometimes I wonder if it was just curious about us, testing our home the way a child might investigate something new. Other times, I remember those glowing red eyes and think there was nothing innocent about its interest in our family. All I know for certain is that 53 years later, I still can't sleep with the curtains open, and the sound of anything scratching at a window makes my blood run cold. Story 11. I still don't sleep well. It's been almost 2 years now, but every time I hear a branch snap outside or see movement in my peripheral vision, I'm right back there in that moment. I've never shared this with anyone except my wife, who thinks I'm either crazy or making it up for attention. I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I live in northern Alabama, about 20 minutes outside Huntsville, in a development that backs up to hundreds of acres of undeveloped forest. My property sits right at the edge where civilization meets wilderness. Behind my house is about 50 yards of cleared land, and then the tree line starts. Beyond that is a steep valley that drops off maybe 70 or 80 feet. It's beautiful country, but isolated once you get past the houses. That evening in November was pretty typical. I'd gotten home from work around 7, had dinner with my wife, and headed out around 8:45 to walk our 2 dogs, Rusty and Bear. Rusty's a lab mix, about 70 pounds, and Bear is a German shepherd, closer to 90. They're good boys, protective and smart. I'd walked them together every night for years without incident. The night was cool, but not cold, maybe 50 degrees, with a quarter moon providing minimal light. I had my usual route, out the back door, across our yard to the clearing behind the house. There's an outbuilding about 50 yards away with a security light that casts long shadows, but gives just enough illumination to make out shapes in the darkness. I never bring a flashlight because my eyes are just fine, and the dogs know the way. I remember I was wearing my Alabama hoodie and jeans, nothing special. I let Rusty off his leash first. He's older and calmer, likes to run ahead and do his business before coming back. Bear was still tied up because he tends to wander farther. I was bending down, untying Bear's leash from my belt loop when I noticed it. At first, I thought it was just a tree shadow, or maybe a large stump I hadn't noticed before. It was standing maybe 4 feet away from me, to my right. But something felt wrong immediately. Trees don't stand in open clearings. They don't stand perfectly still, yet somehow feel alive. My brain tried to make sense of what I was seeing, but failed. It was tall, really tall. I'm 6'1", and this thing towered over me by at least 2 feet, so 8 feet minimum. But it wasn't just the height, it was impossibly wide. Like a linebacker, but broader. The proportions were all wrong for a human, and it was covered from head to toe in thick fur, mostly white with patches of grey. Not like a costume, like actual fur that moved slightly in the breeze. I froze with my fingers still on Bear's leash. The creature didn't move, didn't make a sound, didn't even seem to breathe. But I could feel it watching me. I can't explain how I knew, but I was certain it was staring directly at me. It had no discernible face that I could see in the dim light, just a darker area where a face should be. No glowing eyes, no visible mouth, just presence. What was most unsettling was the silence. No growling, no breathing sounds, nothing, and no smell either, which seems weird to mention, but out in the woods, you expect a large animal to have some kind of scent. This had nothing. It was like a hole in reality standing right next to me. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might hear it. My mouth went completely dry. I had this overwhelming feeling that any sudden movement would trigger something terrible, so I did the only thing I could think of. I pretended I didn't see it. I kept untying Bear's leash, as if everything was normal, though my hands were shaking so badly I could barely manage the knot. That's when Rusty came trotting back from wherever he'd wandered off to. He was happy, tail wagging, until he got about 15 feet away from us. Then he saw it. He just stopped, dropped into a crouch position like he was stalking prey, but completely froze. No barking, no growling, just frozen, staring at the thing. And still, the creature didn't move, didn't acknowledge Rusty at all. It remained focused entirely on me. I finally got Bear's leash untied. The second he was free, he bolted, not running playfully like he normally does, but like he was terrified. He took off toward the house without a backward glance. Rusty stayed frozen in place, and I realized I needed to get us all out of there. I started walking backwards, slowly, keeping the thing in my peripheral vision. I was afraid to turn my back on it. I called to Rusty in what I hoped was a normal voice. "Come on, boy, let's go home." My voice cracked on home, but Rusty responded, backing away slowly before turning and trotting toward me. The whole time, the creature just stood there, not moving, not following, just watching. I kept expecting it to charge, to make some kind of move, but it did nothing. I backed up maybe 20 yards before I felt brave enough to turn around and walk normally, though I kept glancing back every few steps. When I looked back for the 5th or 6th time, it was gone. Just gone. No sound of retreating footsteps, no rustling in the underbrush. It had either moved with impossible silence or simply vanished. I grabbed Rusty's collar and practically ran back to the house, my legs feeling like jelly the whole way. I burst through the back door, locked it behind me, and stood there, panting. My wife asked if I was okay, and I just nodded, unable to explain what had just happened. How do you tell someone you saw an 8-foot-tall, furry, humanoid thing that defied explanation? I mumbled something about thinking I saw a bear and went to take a shower. I needed to process what had happened. Under the hot water, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a person in a costume, but who stands perfectly still in the woods at night wearing a fursuit? And the size was all wrong, too tall, too broad. A bear standing on its hind legs. No, the proportions were wrong, and bears don't stand motionless like that. Plus, both my dogs would have gone crazy at the scent of a bear. What bothered me most was how it just watched me. Predators attack or flee. They don't just observe. It felt intelligent, like it was studying me, and why didn't it hurt me? I was right there, completely vulnerable. My dogs were useless. It could have done whatever it wanted. I didn't sleep that night, or much the next week. I kept the dogs inside after dark for months afterward. My wife thought I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that going back out there would be inviting something terrible. About a week after the encounter, Rusty disappeared. We let him out during the day to do his business, and he just never came back. We searched for days, put up flyers, called the shelters. Nothing. 3 months later, Bear disappeared too in broad daylight, just went into the backyard and vanished. I heard no barking, no struggle. He was just gone. I've since learned that our area has had strange reports over the years. Deer found killed in unusual ways, not like normal predator kills. Hikers in the nearby park reporting feelings of being watched. A few missing pets. Nothing that makes the news, but enough to make me wonder. I've only gone back to the edge of those woods once, during daytime. I found large, unusual depressions in the ground that could have been footprints, but were oddly shapeless, like whatever made them had feet that didn't match any known animal. I took photos, but they didn't show much. What I believe now is that there are things in those woods that we don't understand. Things that have probably been there longer than us. Things that, for the most part, want to be left alone. I think I was allowed to leave that night. I think whatever it was could have hurt me, but chose not to. I've become something of an advocate for protecting those forest areas now. Not because I'm an environmentalist, though that's what I tell people, but because I believe these beings, whatever they are, deserve their space. We've encroached on their territory with our developments and parks. The least we can do is preserve what's left. Sometimes at night, I still hear unusual sounds coming from the tree line, not animal sounds, something different, like wood knocking against wood, or strange whooping calls that don't match any local wildlife. I never investigate. I keep my new dogs, yes, I eventually got new ones, inside after dark. I've installed motion sensor lights all around the property, but I know it's still out there. Sometimes I feel watched even inside my house. I'll catch movement outside a window or see something large and pale moving between trees at dusk. The new dogs sometimes growl at nothing, staring intently at the tree line. I don't know what I encountered that night. Bigfoot, some unknown species, something supernatural. All I know is that it was real, it was intelligent, and it let me go. And that's both the most terrifying and strangely comforting thought I can imagine. Story 12. I still get goosebumps when I think about that day on the Oregon coast. It was the summer of '95, mid-July, I think. My brother Tim and I had been planning this agate hunting trip for months. We're both rock hounds, have been since we were kids, and the beaches around Florence are legendary for agates, especially after a good storm. We'd set up our little camp about 4 miles south of the Siaslaw River, nothing fancy, just a couple of tents and a basic fire pit. The weather that day was classic Oregon coast, overcast, kind of grey, with that constant ocean breeze that gets under your skin after a while. Not cold enough for a heavy jacket, but definitely sweatshirt weather. That morning we'd headed out early, maybe around 7. The tide was going out, which is perfect for agate hunting. Exposes all those fresh pockets of stones that have been tumbled overnight. We each had our little collection bags and were methodically working our way down the beach. Tim's always been more patient than me, willing to stoop and inspect every promising pebble. I tend to look for the distinctive waxy luster that gives agates away. We'd been at it for maybe 3 hours. My back was killing me from all the bending over, so I straightened up to stretch, arching backward and rotating my shoulders. That's when I first saw it. Several hundred yards down the beach, right where the sand meets the tree line, was this dark figure. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just another rock hunter, right? "Hey, Tim," I said, nudging my brother. "Looks like we've got competition down the beach." Tim barely looked up, too focused on a translucent stone he was examining. Oh yeah. But something kept drawing my attention back to that figure. It was just standing there, not moving, not bending down like someone would if they were looking for agates, just watching. And the longer I looked, the more I realized something was off about the proportions. This figure was tall, really tall, taller than anyone I'd ever seen. It stood out even against the backdrop of evergreens, which meant it had to be at least 7 or 8 feet. "Tim," I said, my voice a bit tighter now. "Take a look at that person down there. Does something seem weird to you?" Tim finally looked up, squinting against the glare off the ocean. "Where?" "By the tree line, where the forest meets the beach. See it?" Tim stared for a moment, then reached into his backpack and pulled out his binoculars. He was always the prepared one. He adjusted the focus, then went completely still. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer for what felt like forever. When he finally lowered the binoculars, his expression was unsettled. It looks manlike, I guess," he said. But his voice had this hesitancy that made my stomach tighten. "Here, you look." He handed me the binoculars, and I raised them to my eyes. It took me a second to find the figure, but when I did, Jesus. It was even larger than I'd thought. The entire form was black, not like African American black, but like absence of all color black. There were no variations in tone that you'd expect to see with clothing. No shirt line, no pants, no jacket. Just this uniform dark silhouette. As I watched, it began to move, pacing slowly back and forth between the forest edge and the waterline. It would walk to the water, stop, then turn and walk back to the trees. Each time it made this journey, it seemed to be, I don't know, looking for something, gathering something. I couldn't tell what it was doing, but there was purpose to its movements. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, not really expecting an answer. "I don't know," Tim replied, his voice equally low, "but I don't like it." We stood there for a while, both of us watching this thing through the binoculars, taking turns. The rational part of my brain was trying to come up with explanations. It's just a really tall person wearing dark clothes, maybe, a forest ranger in some kind of special gear. But none of that felt right. Then it changed direction. Instead of moving between the forest and the water, it suddenly started walking along the beach, toward us. And it wasn't just walking, it was covering ground quickly, much faster than a normal walking pace. "It's coming this way," I said, feeling my heart rate spike. Tim grabbed the binoculars back from me. "It's fine," he said, but I could hear the strain in his voice. "We're in a public place. It's broad daylight." Yet those reassurances didn't slow my racing pulse. Within what seemed like seconds, this thing had closed the distance by about 100 yards. Through the binoculars, we could see it more clearly now, and that only made it more unsettling. Its movements were fluid, but somehow wrong. Like a person moving underwater, there was a strange smoothness to its gait. Then, as we watched, it bent down, a very human gesture, picked something up from the sand, and casually tossed it into the ocean. The relief that washed over me was immediate and almost embarrassing. It was throwing rocks into the water, such a mundane, human thing to do. "See?" Tim said, his own relief evident. "It's just some guy, probably a basketball player or something. That's why he's so tall." I nodded, desperately wanting to believe that explanation. "Yeah, you're right. Just a really tall dude in a black wetsuit, maybe." We both laughed nervously, then deliberately turned our attention back to the stones at our feet. But I couldn't focus anymore. Every few seconds, I'd glance up, tracking the figure's location out of the corner of my eye. It had stopped moving toward us directly, but continued its strange pattern. Forest to water, water to forest, occasionally stopping to throw something into the waves. "Let's move a bit further north," Tim suggested after a while, and I knew he was feeling the same unease I was. We gathered our stuff and started walking, keeping close to the waterline, as far from the tree line as possible. I couldn't help noticing that we were now between the figure and our camp. To get back to our tents, we'd have to walk right past it. The next hour was tense. We half-heartedly searched for agates, but mostly we were just killing time, hoping the figure would leave. It didn't. It remained in the same general area, pacing, throwing things, watching. Eventually, Tim checked his watch. "It's almost 3. We should start heading back before it gets too late." I nodded reluctantly. The day had clouded over even more, and the wind had picked up, giving everything a gloomy, ominous feel. "Maybe we can circle around through the dunes," I suggested, not wanting to walk past that thing. Tim shook his head. "The tide's coming in. We'll get cut off if we wait too long. We have to go back the way we came." He was right, of course. The Oregon coast isn't a place where you mess around with the tides. People get stranded, or worse, every year. So we started walking back, both of us tense, our eyes constantly flicking between the path ahead and that dark figure, which was now about a quarter-mile away. As we got closer, I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. The thing wasn't moving anymore. It was just standing at the edge of the tree line, perfectly still. "It's fine," Tim kept saying, though I'm not sure if he was reassuring me or himself. It's just some weirdo. If he tries anything, there are two of us. When we were about 200 yards away, I couldn't take it anymore. I stopped walking. Tim, I don't like this. That's not a person. Tim grabbed my arm. Don't freak out now, Jackson. We're almost past it. Just keep walking and don't stare at it. So that's what we did. We walked steadily, eyes mostly on the sand in front of us, occasionally glancing up to check the figure's position. When we drew level with it, maybe 100 yards away, I couldn't help myself. I looked directly at it, and it was looking right back at us. I couldn't see eyes, couldn't make out a face at all in that black silhouette, but I knew with absolute certainty that it was watching us. The weight of its attention was like a physical pressure. "Don't run," Tim whispered. "Just keep walking normally." We maintained our pace, though every instinct was screaming at me to bolt. As we passed its position, moving further south toward our camp, I expected it to turn, to follow us, but it didn't. It remained perfectly still, just watching. When we were maybe 50 yards past it, I heard a sound that made the hair on my arms stand up, a low, reverberating sort of hum, buzz. I can't describe it exactly, but it wasn't natural. It wasn't the wind or the waves or any animal I've ever heard. "Did you hear that?" I asked Tim. His white-knuckled grip on his collection bag told me he had. We walked faster now, not quite running, but close. Neither of us looked back until we'd covered another couple hundred yards. When we finally did, the figure was gone. Just gone. There was nowhere it could have hidden. The beach was wide open, and the tree line was sparse enough that we should have been able to see it moving away. But it had vanished. We practically ran the rest of the way back to camp. Once there, we immediately started packing up our stuff. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both knew we weren't spending another night on that beach. It was only when we were driving home, the tension finally starting to ease, that Tim broke the silence. "What do you think that was back there?" I shook my head. "I don't know. Just some weirdo, like you said. But the height? And did you notice it never seemed to look down when it was picking up those rocks? It's like it knew exactly where they were." We fell silent again, both lost in our thoughts. A few weeks later, when we were at our uncle's place for a barbecue, we told him about the tall guy on the beach. Uncle Dave has always been into folklore and that kind of stuff. "Why couldn't a Bigfoot throw rocks too?" he asked with a raised eyebrow. Tim and I looked at each other, and something cold settled in my stomach. Because that's exactly what we'd both been thinking, but had been too afraid to say out loud, that whatever we saw on that beach wasn't human. And maybe, deep down, we'd known it all along, from the moment we first spotted that unnaturally tall, uniformly black figure standing motionless against the tree line. To this day, I can't explain what we encountered. All I know is that I've never gone back to that stretch of beach, and I never will. Some things are better left alone, unexplained and undisturbed. And sometimes I think the mind protects itself by refusing to acknowledge what's right in front of it, because the alternative is too terrifying to contemplate. Story 13. I've never told this story to anyone outside my immediate family. Even now, typing this out, I'm still not sure if I should share it. But after seeing all your stories here, I feel like maybe someone will understand or have experienced something similar. I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, in a house that backed up to a pretty dense stretch of woods. Nothing massive like you'd find up north, but enough that you couldn't see through to the other side. Our backyard basically just ended where the tree line started. My first encounter happened when I was in second grade, around 7 years old. It was late May, almost the end of the school year, and we were having this big end-of-year picnic at the elementary school playground. The teachers had set up tables with punch and cookies, parents were grilling hot dogs, and most of the kids were playing on the swings or the monkey bars. I was always kind of a loner as a kid. Not in a sad way, I just liked doing my own thing. While everyone else was running around screaming and playing tag, I wandered off toward this little wooded area at the edge of the playground. No one really paid attention to me. It was the 90s, and parents weren't as hyper-vigilant as they are now. I remember being totally absorbed in collecting pine cones. I had this idea to make a pine cone family, finding different sizes for the mom, dad, and babies. I was moving deeper into the trees, not really paying attention to where I was going, when I literally walked face first into something. At first I thought it was a tree trunk, but tree trunks don't have hair and they don't breathe. I stumbled back a bit and looked up and up and up. It was holding back a huge pine branch, like it had been making its way through the trees, and stopped when it saw me. I was staring at a pair of legs covered in thick, dark brown hair, almost chocolate-colored but with this weird reddish tint underneath. The creature was standing upright, like a person. Here's the strangest part. I wasn't scared. Not really. I was too young to understand that I should be terrified. I just thought, oh, it's a big, hairy person. Kids are weird like that. I had to crane my neck almost straight back to see its face. Its expression changed really quickly. First surprise, then what looked like anger, which did make my heart skip. But then it just seemed calm, curious. It's hard to describe, but its face was incredibly expressive. Not like an animal at all. Its eyes were so gentle, almost sad-looking. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then it slowly turned to its left, let the branch go, and walked away into the trees. Not running, not charging, just walking like a person would. I went back to the picnic area and told my mom I'd seen a big monkey man in the woods. She just laughed and said, "That's nice, honey," and handed me a hot dog. Adults never believe kids about this stuff. I mostly forgot about it after that. Kids are resilient, I guess. Or maybe I just filed it away as one of those weird childhood memories that don't quite make sense. Fast forward about 10 years. I was 16, sitting on our front porch waiting for my friend Jesse to pick me up. It was early winter, around dusk, with that grey-blue light that happens right before it gets truly dark. We'd had a light snow the night before, just enough to dust everything. I was scrolling through my phone when I heard this deep, rumbling growl from the side of our house. It wasn't a dog or anything I'd ever heard before. It was low and I don't know how else to describe it except to say it sounded ancient, primal. Then I heard footsteps, slow, heavy footsteps crunching in the snow. Something big was walking around the side of our house. Again, and I know this sounds crazy, I wasn't panicked. I felt this weird sense of calm. I stood up, walked down our porch steps, and started heading toward my neighbor's driveway, softly singing to myself. Not running, not even walking fast, just moving casually away from whatever was there. The growling stopped as soon as I started singing. The footsteps paused too. I was standing in my neighbor's driveway when Jessie's car pulled up. She rolled down her window, but she wasn't looking at me. She was staring wide-eyed at something behind me, her mouth hanging open. I turned around slowly and saw it, the same creature from my childhood, peering around the corner of my house. Just its head and one massive shoulder visible, those same eyes looking right at me. This time I was old enough to understand how impossible this was, how I should be terrified, but I still wasn't. Jessie started honking her horn and screaming for me to get in the car. When I looked back toward my house, it was gone. "What the actual fuck was that?" Jessie kept saying as we drove away. "It was huge. Did you see it? What was that?" I just told her it was probably a bear, even though we both knew bears aren't 8 feet tall and don't peek around corners like shy children. The next morning, my dad found tracks in the snow. Deep impressions leading from the woods to our house, circling around this dogwood tree my mom had planted years ago, then heading back to the forest. The tracks were huge, easily twice the size of my dad's boot, and whatever made them was heavy enough that the snow beneath each print had partially melted and then refrozen from the heat of the foot itself. My dad took photos and measurements. He even contacted some wildlife expert from Western Michigan University who came out to look at them. The expert guy was really quiet after examining the tracks. He just kept saying they weren't fake, that they were made by something extremely heavy, and that he'd need to consult with colleagues. We never heard from him again. Looking back, I realized there were probably dozens of times this thing was around our house during my childhood. I used to dance in our living room almost every day after school. We had these big windows facing the woods, and I'd put on music and just spin around like an idiot. Often, I'd get this feeling of being watched, but it never felt threatening. More like protective. There was this one time when I was about 12. I was home alone after school, dancing to Britney Spears or something equally embarrassing, when I heard a branch snap outside. I looked out the window and saw something move back into the tree line quickly, just a flash of brown. That night, I found a dead rabbit placed carefully on our back step. Not torn apart or mangled, just dead, like it had been caught and then left there. Maybe as a gift? Food? I still don't know. Another time, when I was 14, I was walking home from the bus stop on this really stormy day. The wind was insane, and this massive branch cracked off a tree right above me. I remember hearing this weird, almost human-like shout from the woods before the branch fell. I jumped forward instinctively, and the branch crashed down right where I'd been standing. When I looked toward the woods, I saw nothing, but I felt that same presence. The last time I saw it was the night before I left for college. I was 18, sitting on our back deck around midnight, just thinking about leaving home. I heard heavy breathing from the edge of the woods, and when I squinted into the darkness, I could make out its silhouette standing between two pine trees. It just stood there, watching me for about 5 minutes. Then it raised one hand, not a paw, a hand, in what looked exactly like a wave goodbye. Then it turned and disappeared into the trees. I've been away from home for years now. I've read all the Bigfoot and Sasquatch stories I could find, but none of them quite match my experience. The creatures in most stories are aggressive or shy and avoid human contact completely. Mine, and I do think of it as mine in some weird way, seemed curious, intelligent, and almost caring. My parents still live in that house. They've never seen it, but my mom swears she hears something big moving around the property sometimes at night. My dad found a handprint pressed into the mud by our garbage cans last spring, much larger than any human hand, with opposable thumbs. I still don't know what to make of all this. Was it protecting me? Why me? Was it just curious about humans, and I happened to be the human it encountered, or is there something more to it? The weirdest part is that I've never felt afraid of it. Not once. Startled, sure. Amazed, definitely, but never afraid. It's like some part of me always knew it meant no harm. I'm back visiting my parents this weekend, actually. Last night, I sat out on the deck with a cup of tea, looking into those same woods. Nothing happened, but I felt that familiar sensation of being watched. And honestly, it felt like coming home. I don't expect anyone to believe this. I barely believe it myself sometimes. But I know what I saw, what I experienced, and whatever it was real. It was there. And for some reason I'll never understand, it watched over me for years. Story 14. I still don't know what to make of what happened to me last spring. I've been hunting since I was 12. That's over 20 years of experience in the woods. I've seen all kinds of wildlife, been in all sorts of situations, but nothing that's ever made me question my sanity like this. It was early March 2020, right before all the COVID stuff really kicked off. I went out to my in-laws' property near Pine Bluff for some coyote hunting. They've got about 80 acres of mixed forest and fields, and the coyotes had been getting bold, coming up near their chicken coop. My father-in-law asked if I could thin the population a bit, and I was happy for the excuse to get out in the woods. It was around 3 in the afternoon when I arrived. The weather was perfect, about 55 degrees with a slight breeze, overcast but not threatening rain. I parked my truck at the edge of the gravel road that runs along the property line and started getting my gear together from the trunk. Nothing fancy, just my Remington 223, some extra ammo, my rangefinder, and a small pack with water and a few snacks. That's when I first noticed something odd. There was a group of wild turkeys in the field, beyond the first line of trees, maybe 5 or 6 of them. They were just doing their turkey thing, pecking around in the dead grass. But about 50 feet beyond them was something white. It was low to the ground, maybe sitting or lying down. From that distance, it just looked like a white blob against the brown winter grass. At first, I didn't think much of it. Could have been a plastic bag blown in from somewhere, maybe even a small patch of late snow in a shaded spot. I finished loading my pack, locked the truck, and headed toward the tree line. By the time I got to the edge of the woods and looked out at the field again, both the turkeys and the white thing were gone. I shrugged it off and headed into the trees. The plan was to walk about a mile in to where there's a small clearing with a fallen oak that makes a good spot to set up. The woods were quiet, just the sound of dead leaves crunching under my boots and the occasional bird call. That's when I saw it again. About 60 yards ahead of me, standing between 2 pine trees, was something white. But this wasn't a plastic bag or snow patch. It was standing upright on 2 legs. Not tall, maybe 3 or 4 feet at most. It was completely white, with what looked like fuzzy or furry covering all over it. The weird thing was how it glowed slightly, not like it was giving off light, but like it was reflecting much more light than anything else in the dim forest. And it was staring right at me. I couldn't make out facial features from that distance, but I could feel it watching me. I stopped dead in my tracks. We just stood there, looking at each other for what must have been at least a full minute. My heart started beating faster, but I wasn't exactly scared, just confused. It didn't look threatening, just strange, very, very strange. I've seen albino animals before, but this wasn't that. It was upright, humanoid, but definitely not human. I took a step forward, and it immediately took a step back. Not in a panicked way. It was deliberate, measured. I took another step, and it backed away again, maintaining the exact same distance between us. Then it turned slightly and disappeared behind some thick underbrush. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I'd just seen. My rational brain kicked in. Maybe it was just a weird reflection, or some kind of rare animal I wasn't familiar with. I decided to continue to my hunting spot, trying to convince myself it was nothing. I'd walked maybe another 100 yards when I spotted it again. Same distance ahead, about 60 yards. Same position, standing upright, watching me. This time I reached for my rifle, thinking I could use the scope to get a better look, but my hands were shaking. I couldn't explain why, but something felt wrong about raising my weapon toward this thing. Not morally wrong. It just felt dangerous somehow, like breaking an unspoken rule. I lowered the rifle and just stood watching it. Then I took a few steps forward, and sure enough, it retreated the exact same number of steps, always maintaining that distance. Not running away in fear, not advancing aggressively, just keeping me at this precise distance that was close enough to see it, but too far to make out details. This happened a 3rd time in a small clearing, and that's when I started getting really uneasy. This wasn't random. It felt calculated. It felt like I was being led somewhere, like this thing was deliberately drawing me deeper into the woods. My skin was crawling now. The thing about hunting is you develop instincts. You learn to listen to that voice in your head that tells you when something isn't right. And everything about this situation was screaming at me that something was very wrong. What really got to me was how it maintained that perfect distance. Not once did it run full speed, not once did it hide completely. It was like it wanted me to follow, but didn't want me to catch up or lose sight of it. It was playing some kind of game, and I didn't know the rules. I made a decision right there. I wasn't going any deeper into those woods. Whatever this thing was, it wanted me to follow, and that felt like a trap. I turned around and started walking back toward my truck, fighting the overwhelming urge to look over my shoulder. My pace quickened with each step. I wasn't running. Hunters know better than to run in the woods. But I was moving as fast as I safely could. The whole way back, I felt like I was being watched. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I had this pressure in my chest like I couldn't get a full breath. When I finally reached my truck, I threw my gear in the back and got the hell out of there. I didn't even call my father-in-law to tell him I was leaving. I just drove straight home, white-knuckling the steering wheel the whole way. I haven't been back to that property since. I made up some excuse about work getting busy, and eventually COVID gave me a perfect reason to stay away. I've tried researching what I might have seen. The closest thing I can find are stories about not deer, animals that look like deer, but something is just wrong about them. Or maybe some kind of forest spirit from Native American lore. But nothing quite matches what I saw. The thing that still haunts me is the deliberateness of it all. Wild animals don't behave like that. They either run away completely or they don't. They don't play cat and mouse games. They don't try to lure you deeper into the woods. Whatever I encountered that day had purpose. It had a plan. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd kept following it. Where was it leading me? What would have happened when we reached wherever we were going? Would there have been more of them waiting, or something else entirely? I've been a hunter all my life, and I've never felt prey until that day. It's been over a year now, and I still haven't told anyone the full story. My wife knows something happened. She says I came home looking like I'd seen a ghost. But I just told her I got spooked by something in the woods and felt silly about it. But I know what I saw. That small, white, fuzzy creature walking on two legs, maintaining that perfect distance. It wasn't natural. And the strangest part? In all my panic and confusion, I never once heard it make a sound. Not a footstep, not a breath, nothing. Complete silence, just those eyes, watching me from exactly 60 yards away, always 60 yards. I've gone hunting since then, but only in places I know well, and never alone. And I always catch myself scanning the trees for anything white, anything watching. Because whatever that thing was, I can't shake the feeling that our game of cat and mouse isn't over. I just don't know which one of us is the cat. Story 15. I've been working as a logger for most of my adult life, and I've seen plenty of wildlife in the forests around British Columbia. Bears, moose, cougars, you name it. But what happened to me in late September of '77 still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I've kept quiet about this for years because I didn't want people thinking I was crazy, but I need to get this off my chest. That day started like any other. It was getting cooler as fall was settling in, but it was still decent riding weather. I'd finished up my shift and decided to take my motorcycle home instead of carpooling with the other guys. I loved riding that old Triumph. Nothing beats the feeling of the wind and the rumble of the engine, especially after a long day of chainsaws and timber. I was taking this narrow road that runs alongside the Canadian National Railway tracks and the Fraser River, about 20 miles outside Prince George. You know the one. It cuts through that rock canyon where the forest gets real thick on both sides. I'd ridden it 100 times before. It was around 5 in the afternoon, still plenty of daylight left, but the shadows were getting longer. I remember thinking about stopping for a beer at Murphy's on the way home when I spotted something moving in the ditch up ahead. My first thought was bear. We'd been seeing a lot of them that season, coming down to the river to fatten up before winter. I eased off the throttle, slowing my bike down. The engine was still pretty loud, chugging along as I approached whatever was in that ditch. Usually animals bolt when they hear my bike coming, especially bears. They don't like the noise one bit. But this thing didn't run. Instead, it stood up. Not like a bear stands up, balancing awkwardly on its hind legs. This thing just rose, smoothly, naturally, like a person would. I felt a cold sweat break out across my back instantly. My hands got clammy on the handlebars. The thing was huge, at least 6 feet tall, maybe more, covered head to toe in dark brown hair, not black like I first thought. The hair was uniform all over its body, not patchy or mangy like a sick bear might look. My bike was still moving, slower now, but still rolling forward. I was maybe 30 yards away when it stepped onto the road. Just walked right out, calm as can be, like it was. The most natural thing in the world. I've hunted since I was 12. I know how animals move. I know what belongs in these woods and what doesn't. This wasn't right. It walked exactly like a person walks, heel to toe, arms swinging slightly at its sides, not lumbering or shuffling like a bear would if it was trying to stay upright. The thing that really got me, what I still see in my dreams sometimes, is what happened next. When it was halfway across the road, directly in my path, it turned its head and looked right at me. Just turned and looked. No startled jump, no fear, nothing. It was the most casual, almost bored glance you could imagine. Like it was thinking, oh, there's that noisy thing again, and then just went about its business. Its face, I couldn't make out features clearly, but it wasn't a bear's face. The head was more rounded, sitting directly on broad shoulders without much of a neck. I couldn't see eyes exactly, but I felt them on me. I felt seen, then it just continued walking, straight across the road and into the trees on the other side. Not running, not hurrying, just walking away, disappearing into the underbrush, like it had somewhere to be. I rolled to a stop where it had crossed. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I cut the engine and just sat there, straddling my bike in the middle of that empty road, listening. The forest was dead quiet. No birds, no nothing. Just silence. I've always been a practical guy. I used to laugh at the old-timers in the bars when they'd start their Sasquatch stories after a few too many beers. Thought it was all bull, tall tales to scare the new guys or impress tourists. But sitting there on that road, my hands shaking on the handlebars of my bike, I knew I'd seen something that wasn't supposed to exist. After a few minutes, I kick-started my bike and got the hell out of there. I didn't stop at Murphy's that night. Went straight home, grabbed a bottle of whiskey, and drank until my hands stopped shaking. The next day at work, I couldn't focus worth a damn. Bob, my cutting partner, kept asking what was wrong with me. I almost told him, but the words wouldn't come out. How do you tell someone something like that without sounding completely off your rocker? A week later, I got up the nerve to go back to that spot in the daylight. I parked my truck on the side of the road and looked around. The ground was hard-packed dirt and gravel. No tracks to be found. I walked into the woods where it had disappeared, searching for broken branches, hair caught on trees, anything. Found nothing. I even went to the local library and looked up information about bear populations, thinking maybe I'd seen some rare type of bear with a genetic condition or something. But I was just fooling myself. What I saw wasn't a bear. It wasn't any animal I'd ever seen in 20 years of working these forests. The way it moved, the way it looked at me, there was an intelligence there, a presence, almost like it recognized me as another thinking being and acknowledged me before moving on. No wild animal does that. For months afterward, I took the long way home, adding an extra 40 minutes to my commute just to avoid that stretch of road. I started carpooling with the guys more often, making up excuses about my bike needing repairs. I couldn't bring myself to ride alone through that canyon again. The few times I did have to take that road, I'd find myself white-knuckling the handlebars, scanning the tree line constantly, my stomach in knots. I started carrying my hunting rifle strapped to my bike, which I'd never done before. Not that I think I would have used it. What would I even tell the game warden if I shot at something like that? Winter came, and the snow made the road too dangerous for the motorcycle. I was almost relieved to put it away for the season. By spring, I'd convinced myself that maybe I'd been more tired than I thought that day. Maybe my eyes had played tricks on me in the fading light, but deep down, I knew what I saw. The following summer, there was a story in the local paper about strange noises heard by campers along that same stretch of the Fraser. Howls that didn't sound like wolves or coyotes. Large branches broken off trees at heights no normal person could reach. The rangers blamed it on bears and windstorms. I kept my mouth shut. A few of the native guys I worked with noticed I'd stopped taking that road. One day during lunch, Thomas, an older fellow from one of the local bands, pulled me aside and asked point blank if I'd seen something out there. I hesitated, then nodded. He didn't ask for details, just told me that his people had stories about the tall ones who lived in the deep woods and that they were best left alone. He said I was lucky. Most people who see them have bad dreams for months after. I didn't tell him about my nightmares. It's been years now, and I've never seen anything like it again. I still work the same forests, still ride my motorcycle when the weather's good. But I'm more careful about riding alone at dusk. I pay more attention to the shadows between the trees. Sometimes when I'm working deep in the woods, I get this feeling like I'm being watched. The hair on the back of my neck stands up, and everything goes quiet. I'll stop my chainsaw and look around, but there's never anything there. Just trees and silence. I don't know what I saw that day. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it, those names make it sound like some kind of joke, some campfire story to scare kids. But there was nothing funny about what crossed that road in front of me. It was real, solid, alive, and it knew I was there. The strangest part is that I wasn't afraid in the moment. Not really. It was afterward that the fear set in, when I realized what I'd witnessed. Something that shouldn't exist but does. Something that walks through our world but isn't part of it. I've never told this story publicly before. My wife knows, and maybe two close friends. Most people would think I'm crazy or making it up. But I know what I saw. I was stone cold sober, wide awake, and it was broad daylight. Whatever it was, it's still out there in those woods, living its life parallel to ours, occasionally crossing paths, but mostly staying hidden. And sometimes, when I'm riding that road at dusk, I slow down a little near that spot. Not because I'm afraid of seeing it again, because part of me hopes I will. Story 16. I've never shared this publicly before. For years, I've wondered if anyone would even believe me. But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. This happened back in July 1998 when I was 17. I grew up in Hope, British Columbia, a small mountain town surrounded by dense forests, lakes, and wilderness. For those who don't know the area, it's this little spot nestled in the mountains about 2 hours east of Vancouver, right where the Fraser Valley narrows into the Fraser Canyon. That summer night started like many others. Me and my two buddies, Matt and Jesse, had spent the evening doing what bored small-town teenagers did back then, drinking cheap beer we'd gotten someone's older brother to buy, smoking some weed, and hanging out at First Beach on Kokawa Lake. The lake was our regular spot during summer, a little patch of sand where local kids would gather, have bonfires, swim, and generally mess around away from parents and police. By about 2:30 in the morning, we decided to head up to Second Beach, which was further along the lake but more secluded. We were definitely drunk, probably way too drunk, and definitely stoned. I remember us laughing at absolutely nothing, shouting random movie quotes, and just being loud, idiot teenagers. The walk from First Beach to Second Beach isn't that far, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, but it involves going up this winding road that runs alongside the lake. Looking back, we were making way too much noise for that time of night. The road is surrounded by dense forest on one side and drops down to the lake on the other. Houses are scattered here and there, and I'm sure we woke up a few people, but we were at that age where we thought we were invincible and didn't really care who we bothered. The night was warm, but not hot. Typical July weather for that area. The sky was clear and full of stars, with just a sliver of moon providing some light. Besides our drunken voices, the only sounds were the gentle lapping of the lake water and the occasional rustle of leaves in the light breeze. I remember looking up at one point and thinking how bright the stars were, how peaceful it all seemed. We came to this fork in the road. If you take a right, you head toward what we call the Othello Tunnels, and eventually the Coquihalla Highway, but we needed to go left to continue to Second Beach. This particular spot has always been a bit eerie, even in daylight. On the left side of the road, there's this massive rocky bluff covered in huge cedar trees, some of them probably hundreds of years old. The trees tower over the road, creating this wall of darkness even on a bright day. On the right side, the ground slopes down toward Kaukawa Lake. We were about to take the left fork when it happened. The sound came first. I've spent 25 years trying to accurately describe what I heard that night, and I still can't do it justice. It started as this deep, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once, not just from a specific direction, but like it was surrounding us. Then it changed, rising in pitch until it became this unholy scream that tore through the night. It wasn't animal, wasn't human, wasn't anything I recognized. The closest I can come to describing it is if you took King Kong, mixed him with Roy Orbison's highest note, and added Axl Rose's scream when he's completely enraged. But even that doesn't capture it. It had this primal quality that triggered something deep in my brain, some ancient fear response that said, run. But we couldn't run. We were frozen in place. As the sound continued, the trees on the bluff, these massive ancient cedars, began to shake violently. Not like when a strong wind hits them and they sway gently. This was like someone had grabbed them and was physically shaking them with incredible force. Branches were snapping, cedar needles were raining down onto the road in front of us. These weren't small trees. We're talking mature cedars that would take 3 people holding hands to wrap around the trunk. The sound and the shaking intensified, and I felt it physically in my body. It was like when you stand next to a massive speaker at a concert and can feel the bass in your chest, except this was my entire skeleton vibrating with the sound. My teeth were chattering, not from cold, but from the vibration. I'm not embarrassed to admit that I literally shit myself a little. Not full on, but enough that I was standing there with wet underwear, completely paralyzed by fear. Matt was next to me, his face completely drained of color, looking like he might pass out. Jesse was a few steps behind us, and I heard him whimper. The most terrifying part was that we couldn't see what was making the sound or shaking the trees. The bluff was dark, and whatever was up there remained hidden in the blackness between the trees. But it felt massive. The power needed to shake those trees like that. It had to be something incredibly strong. The entire incident probably lasted no more than 2 minutes, but it felt like hours. Eventually, the sound faded, not abruptly, but like whatever made it was moving away, deeper into the forest. The trees gradually stopped shaking, though smaller branches and needles continued to fall for a few moments after. When it finally stopped, none of us spoke. We just turned around and ran back toward First Beach, toward town, toward lights and people and safety. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs ached, not once looking back. When we finally stopped running, we were back at the main road that leads into town. We were gasping for breath, still half drunk, but completely sobered by fear. Jesse started talking first, asking what the hell that was. Matt suggested a bear, but I immediately shot that down. I'd heard bear sounds before, growls, roars, the works. This wasn't that. Cougar, Jesse suggested. But again, I'd heard cougars scream. They sound eerily like a woman being murdered, and this wasn't that either. Plus, no cougar could shake trees like that. We ended up crashing at Matt's house since it was closest, all 3 of us in his room with the lights on until dawn. None of us slept. We just sat there, occasionally trying to make sense of what we'd experienced, but mostly just sitting in silence, still processing the fear. The next day, we went back in broad daylight. I don't know why we did. Morbid curiosity, I guess. Or maybe we needed to prove to ourselves that it had really happened. Sure enough, there were cedar branches and needles scattered all over the road at that exact spot. Looking up at the bluff, we could see where several branches had been broken off high up in the trees. We searched for tracks or any other signs, but found nothing conclusive. The ground on the bluff is mostly rock with patches of moss and fallen needles, not great for leaving footprints. We did find a spot where the moss had been disturbed and scraped away from the rock, but that could have been anything. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that sound again. I had nightmares where I was alone on that road, hearing the sound getting closer and closer, but unable to move. Over the years, I've tried to rationalize what happened. Wind? No way. It was a calm night, and no wind could shake those trees like that. Some kind of landslide or earth movement, possibly, but that doesn't explain the sound. A bear? Absolutely not. No bear could make that sound or have that impact. As time has passed, I've become increasingly convinced that what we encountered that night was a Sasquatch. I know how that sounds, believe me. Before that night, I thought Bigfoot was just a myth, something made up to scare kids or sell tabloid papers. But now, I'm certain they exist, and they live in those mountains. I've talked to a few local indigenous elders over the years, and they have their own stories and names for these creatures. They weren't surprised by my experience at all. One elder just nodded and said, "You're lucky it just warned you away." That night changed my relationship with the wilderness around Hope. I still hike, still fish, still enjoy the outdoors, but I'm different now. I'm more cautious, more aware. I don't go out at night if I can help it, and I never make excessive noise in the woods anymore. Sometimes when I'm in the forest and the wind picks up, causing the trees to sway, I feel that old fear creeping back. My heart races, my palms sweat, and for a split second I'm 17 again, standing on that road, hearing that impossible sound. Whatever it was on that bluff that night, it was powerful, it was territorial, and it was letting us know we weren't welcome. Message received, loud and clear, 25 years later, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've never heard anything like it since, and I hope I never do again. The strangest part? Neither Matt nor Jesse will talk about it anymore. When I've brought it up over the years, they change the subject or make excuses to leave. It's like they've locked that night away in some part of their minds they don't want to access. Maybe that's healthier than my obsession with understanding it. All I know for sure is that there are things in those mountains that science hasn't explained yet. And if you're ever on Kaukaua Lake Road late at night and hear something that sounds like nothing you've ever heard before, run. Don't look back. Don't try to see it. Just run.